Before I get on to today's topic, I just want to take a second and recognize that I completely omitted one of my favorite bands that has stuck with me this whole time from the last episode that I did about music that I've still been gravitating to since I stopped producing this podcast about 10 years ago. And that band is Hatebreed. I did have a little bit of a falling out with them in maybe like the late 2000s-ish when I realized that they were going to be one of those bands that just kind of kept putting out the same thing more or less over and over again, which isn't a criticism at all. I know I talk a lot about bands evolving and taking risks, but there are some bands that just do something so well that anytime they try to change it up, it can easily backfire and be distracting. For instance, I think it was back like 2004, the DVD was released around the time of Soulfly's Prophecy that had a lot of interview footage interspliced with live footage and music videos from Soulfly's career up to that point. And Max made it a point to recognize the fact that he has never experimented with his vocal style, even though people have asked him maybe he should try, or why doesn't he, or they've applauded him for not to sound like a closed-minded traditionalist or anything, but I am definitely more in that latter camp of vocalists of his ilk that to me definitely include vocalists like Jamie Josta, who do something really well in one area. And when it comes to Hatebreed, Jamie Josta's vocal stylings as the frontman in that band are, to me, kind of untouchable. So around the time of their album Supremacy, and then a little bit later on with their self-titled album, Jamie Josta was integrating a little bit more, I don't know if I call them straight up clean vocals, but he was veering away from his expected hardcore frontman thing. And he was experimenting with adding just a little bit more melody, even if it was like in a growl kind of way, or like a sing-song yell kind of thing, which again, I'm not totally opposed to. I love Biohazard and so on. But with Hatebreed in particular, there was just something really conspicuous and a little too try-hard about it. I just didn't feel like it fit with their music, and it was something that Jamie was experimenting with that I don't know if it was really like appropriate for what they do. I mean, who am I to say what they should or shouldn't do? I'm just telling you my kind of visceral reaction to it was to kind of cringe and be like, ugh, I don't like this. Luckily, for the most part, they haven't really stuck with it. I think it was something they tried and let go. But going back and listening to a lot of Jamie's side projects, including his solo project, Josta, I'm glad he's given himself an outlet for doing more of that kind of stuff and experimenting with his voice and vocal stylings, though it's really not for me. What is for me, though, is just Hatebreed in general. Every album they've put out, I've had to go back and kind of catch up a little bit, especially after having seen them all these years later, which you can hear on an episode recently that I did with a couple friends. But I was so blown away by how great they still are live. I got re-inspired to catch up on the stuff that I had not given as much of a chance since, like I said, I had a little bit of a falling out with their vocal experimentation for a while there. But even on those albums, I've accepted it and embraced it. And to me, Hatebreed is just one of those consistent bands that can do no wrong. Everything they do feels honest, real, has integrity. From any point in their career, gets a pretty similar reaction from me. I love their dichotomy of exploring dark, angsty kind of stuff, but always having a positive, constructive, and empowering spin on it. A lot of times, if I want to listen to something like angry and dark, I'll listen to stuff like Slipknot or Korn. But if I'm in a good mood, if I want to get pumped up, if I want energy, if I want to celebrate, Hatebreed has and still is my go-to. So I would have been remiss to leave that out. I'm sure I forgot some other stuff too in that last episode, but hopefully at least it's a general overview of where I've been at musically this past decade or so. And with that out of the way, let's get into what this episode is actually supposed to be about.
I got a golden ticket.
Hey, how's it? I'm Dan. In case it hasn't been made abundantly obvious by now, I was born in the early 80s, which according to certain powers that be, technically makes me an elder millennial, for what it's worth. To me, that really comes down to the fact that I was the last generation to really know and remember a world before the public internet. Not only that, but the formative years of the internet coincided with my formative years of childhood and early adult development. This means that I was a teenager when the way the world had been used to communicating and consuming information and media for the past several decades, like via radio, newspapers, magazines, network TV, phones, cable TV, analog, records, and cassette technology, etc., was changing and evolving quicker than it had since probably the printing press. And since I was lucky enough to have had exposure to this area of PC use, namely because my dad had been a PC hardware and network tech in the 90s, and a friend in elementary school who was learning how to code with MS-DOS, I found that the Web 1.0 was a perfect platform for me to explore and express another passion that was exploding for me during this time: music. Even though things like snail mail lists and zines were still a big thing back then, I got the internet somewhere around 8th grade, I think, which would have been somewhere around 96 to 97. And around that exact same time, I was being exposed to alt-rock and grunge, which soon then led to thrash, and nu metal, and then hardcore. So though I was aware and somewhat participatory in the analog ways of exploring and connecting with others about this burgeoning interest of mine, the internet was so fresh and current and exciting that it was the kind of no-brainer for my peers and I to adopt that as our main music management system. Sorry, I love alliteration. But remember, this was well before social media and blogs, YouTube, etc. Even though things like commenting and message boards were a thing back then, they were much more niche and nebulous than things like Reddit and BuzzFeed today. Other than band and artist official websites being a great, though sometimes inconsistent, source for staying up to date with music news, releases, events, street teams, tours, all that kind of stuff, the more active and exciting community that my friends and I were privy to and spent countless hours scouring at home or at the public library or even at school sometimes, were fan sites. I still see these pop up here and there nowadays, but they're mostly relegated to social media feeds as opposed to just like standalone websites. But in the late 90s, these were where it was at. Where's that? Even with super low-res images, MP3s that sounded like they were being played in a tin can, and blurry and pixelated videos of the era with no consistent way to widely share them, there was an astounding abundance of bootleg media, fan art, and an otherwise unhindered wild west of creative ways people were expressing their passions for bands and artists. Early hosting sites like GeoCities and Angelfire were an open door to not only learn and grow with technical skills, which is how I first learned HTML, but were a vibrant community in and of themselves, similar to things like WordPress, Wix, GoDaddy, and Squarespace are today. But before blogs and RSS feeds and social media tendrils that currently infest all areas of the web that they can cling to, people would just write up their thoughts and ideas in Times New Roman on a simple page of HTML and try to get on search engines like Yahoo, Alta Vista, Lycos, all that good old stuff to get their stuff seen. And I'm talking pre-Google here, folks, if that's even imaginable. It only took me a short while perusing other people's fan sites until it hit me that I needed to get in this game to give a more accessible home to my erupting passion for music that I was experiencing beyond simply talking to friends and reading magazines or writing it down in a journal or something. So I got myself a GeoCities account, and since this was before we had fancy drag and drop website editors, I had to copy and paste other people's HTML and figure out what it did and how to try to make it do what I wanted it to. My first site was called Def Blackened. Def for my favorite band Deftones, and Blackened, my favorite Metallica song. Super deep and clever, I know. I can't remember exactly when I came up with the handle and site title Breathing Underwater, but it must have been sometime in the very early 2000s because it's originally from a song called Learning off an Always New EP by Jonah Matranga, who went by One Line Drawing back then, and I think has started going by that again more recently. So back then I used the site as a showcase of my growing list of favorite bands at the time, like Deftones, Korn, Fear Factory, Soulfly, Metallica, the list goes on. I didn't have much original content. It was mostly curated pictures and news items I found on other fan sites, but the one original thing I did put on there was recountings and reviews of concerts that I went to. As much as I enjoyed listening to the bands that I loved, and not too long after getting into music, started my own band and playing music, which was called Minion, by the way. We were kind of like a hardcore nu metal band, and you can see our stuff from back then at breathingunderwater.us. So where it really all came together for me at this time was experiencing music live. At 14-ish, it started as a trickle, which was whenever we could convince our parents to take us to clubs in DC, like the 930 Club and the Capitol Ballroom, which was later Nations. Our parents were awesome and gracious about this, by the way. They repeatedly drove us from the Baltimore area to DC because Baltimore was not a hub of national venues and acts like it is now. Even on school nights, drop us off for hours and then come pick us up later that night. But when my friends and I came of driving age, the floodgates opened and we went to as many shows as often as we could. I would joke later that the only reason I felt so compelled to start working food and retail as a teen, which included McDonald's, Popeyes, Pizza Hut, Circuit City, and even the Maryland Renaissance Fair, was to pay for my concert and music consumption lifestyle. Please keep in mind there wasn't Spotify or even Napster back then, just CDs and cassettes. And after going to these shows, sometimes immediately after later, I would write up and publish a journal entry on my website about the experience. No smartphones back then, no point-and-shoot digital cameras. Sure, there were hefty VHS and high-8 camcorders or film still cameras, but they wouldn't let you bring those in anyway. Plus, I wouldn't have wanted to get it smashed in the pit. Bootlegs were sporadically available here and there, but otherwise there was little we could do to immortalize and commemorate these experiences except write about them later. I must have written dozens of these. I can still smell the sweat and smoke scent of my post-show clothes as I clacked away at the keyboard with a huge dumb grin on my face of how epic and amazing the show was the night before. But I was a kid back then, and foresight wasn't my strongest virtue. I didn't consider backing up this content until I was well into college. I could have easily copied and pasted my code into RTF files and put them on floppy disks. Instead, I just assumed it would always be there, and as time went on and my focus shifted to other priorities, GeoCities and their ilk eventually went the way of Friendster and AOL. One thing I did make it a point to back up and save from this period, though, was copies, photos, and scans of memorabilia that even if I never actually go back and look at it, I feel a certain hoarder sense of comfort knowing that they'll live on in the deep, dark corners of my hard drives. So one piece of that childhood and early adulthood memorabilia was my concert tickets. I used to stick them on my bedroom wall after each show. I had quite the collection going for a while there that I moved from place to place once it was time to leave the nest and go to college. I'm glad I at least had the sense to back those tickets up because I'd otherwise have almost nothing left to show from all that time, energy, and money and passion dedicated to those experiences. I've long since worn out any of the band shirts I would make it a point to get at those shows. So with the renewed excitement I've had going back to shows after the lull that was 2020, which you can hear on a recent episode of this podcast, I've been reflecting on how many great concert experiences I've had over the years. And I really, really, really wish I could go back and read my old website journal entries about them. But since I can't, and since I still do have an albeit incomplete record of many of the shows I saw until tickets started going more digital, I realized recently that the next best thing I could do to commemorate this formative time of my life is to use this platform to recount and reflect on those experiences. So this is going to cover about a decade of time, mid-ish 90s to mid-2000s, basically high school and college. After I was out of college, becoming a boring 9-to-5 working, somewhat financially mindful, responsible adult, I started going to fewer and fewer shows overall. I still saw plenty of live acts, and I still have plenty of tickets to show for them, but this just feels like a logical window of time to delve into for now. Honestly, like I said, even though I was in school all throughout these years, I can't deny that my main priority was consuming and experiencing music. Everything else is pretty much secondary. After college, though, those priorities naturally kind of swapped. The passion was still there. There were just more and more roadblocks of responsibility that altered my ability to explore that passion how I did when I was younger, and much lighter on overall responsibility. Also, like I said, this is by no means a comprehensive list of every show I went to during this time. It's only representative of the shows I kept tickets from. If you're interested to see the tickets I'm talking about, I've posted them on my Instagram, which is @breathingunderwater1. along with some photos of a few of the shows. I'm sure there's many more that I don't have a record, both physically and mentally of for whatever reason. This is just what I do have. Also, for the most part, this is just the larger, more national acts I saw. I got into the local hardcore punk and nu metal scene when I started a band in high school, which again is called Minion, that you can see at breathingunderwater.us. And I have a whole other way to explore my passion in music that way. But those shows rarely use or required physical tickets, just some cash at the door for the most part. And I'm doubtful that name dropping the artists and venues that were part of those local scenes would really mean much to anybody that actually wasn't there. However, I do hope that this nostalgia trip evokes some positive and nostalgic memories and feelings for you, as it absolutely will for me. Even if we weren't at the same Ozfest or you were seeing Pantera in California instead of Virginia like I was, I have no doubt that you'll know exactly where I'm coming from when I describe the sights, sounds, and feelings that these kind of experiences can only have for those of us who were lucky enough to experience them when and where we did. All right, before we get into the weeds here, before we go ticket by ticket, I just want to give a couple general thoughts that just kind of come to mind when I consider all the stuff I'm about to get into. One thing is, especially for the DC shows, but really any show. So I typically went with my brother Dave, who you can hear on a variety of the podcasts and videos that I have up on my website, but also our best friend Jason. And I got to give props to his dad, who would go out of his way to not only take us and drop us off to shows, which was what my parents usually did. He was a rock and roller from an earlier generation. He would go sit at the bar and nod his head to all the Soulfly and Fear Factory goodness with us, and he was awesome, and we had a blast driving there with him. And then every once in a while, we would go with some more people, either Galdo together or meet people there. So there was always not only good times because of the music, but also because of the people. I think all of us found out pretty early that, I mean, I'm just speaking for myself here, but from what I remember remember, none of us were major moshers. We were more those, like, we wanted to be as close to the front as possible showgoers, and those special nights where we would be able to be up at the bar right there. It was just us, the barrier, the bouncers, and the band. I didn't mean that to have so much alliteration, but kind of works out perfectly. That was what we aimed for. So sometimes we would get there literally hours early. We'd be the first person in line. We'd be leaning up against a stop sign pole outside of 930 Club or Nations or whatever. And this is mostly high school, what I'm referring to right now. But I carried a lot of the stuff over into those college years too. Though in college, as I'll get to, we were usually able to ride bikes or walk or take trains or whatever to shows. So it's a little bit more convenient than driving from Baltimore to DC. But we get there early. I had hypoglycemia in college, so I would get really, really hungry and shaky, lose focus and cranky and all that kind of stuff if I didn't eat regularly. So I would bring everything from granola bars to sometimes we would stop for food on the way, and I would get, like a few burgers at McDonald's or Wendy's and eat some while we were there. But it was so early before the show, and we would be there at all hours of the night. One thing that I've noticed as I've gotten older, and I don't think it's just me, I think it's also clubs, but shows have been ending earlier and earlier as I've gotten older. But I remember back in high school, we would stay out like on a Tuesday night to see Machine Head and not get back home from DC to Baltimore until like maybe 3, 4 in the morning sometimes. And we weren't like out partying or something. We were just, that was the show. Would go until the bars would close, which was, I believe, 2, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was the cutoff back then. I don't know if I'm correct on that. I'm pretty sure it was like 1 or 2. And then we would have to, drive all the way home and drop people off. And so sometimes we wouldn't get home till like early the next morning. And of course, then we'd get up and go to school the next day. Sometimes, we'd be in line for so long, and by the time I got in the show, I'd be hungry again. So sometimes I would bring, in my 90s baggy, cargo shorts or Jinkos, I would store an extra burger or something, and it would be all cold and mushed up, and I'd be sitting there just like choking down an old Wendy's burger from like 4 hours ago. Oh, it was great. I remember because I'd always be really worried about losing money that I would bring and my earplugs. Because yes, after the first, and I'll get to this in a second, but the first few shows I went to, I didn't wear earplugs. Yikes. I'll get to that in a minute. So I did start bringing those cheap little foam earplugs just to save my hearing. But I would always be worried about losing that kind of stuff out of my pockets. I don't think I ever did, but just because of the nature of the crowd, if we weren't able to get up to the front, we would still prefer to be as close as possible. So sometimes we would be in that smushed up wave of people that would be kind of bouncing up and down. You didn't have enough really room to move around. Haven't seen a lot of shows like this, as I've gotten older, probably more like the kind of shows I'm going to and the genre. But back then, when like the 930 Club or Nation would be sold out, there would be at least like half a dozen or more rows of people just all mashed up into each other, barely able to breathe. And then there would be the pit, and then there'd be all the other people that would be kind of more standing there rocking out. And then so the people in front of the pit would be the ones that were just kind of like undulating with that wave of, bouncing to the new metal. So I was always worried about losing stuff. So I would traditionally keep my money and maybe my ticket, because I'd have to keep my ticket, which I'm glad I did because it's allowed me to do this. I'd keep it in my shoe. Sometimes I'd put it under the insole in my, Vans or Airwalks. And also on the food front, as 930 Club, I'm going to blame 930 Club for my couple years of vegetarianism during college, at least as the inception for the idea. Really wasn't even something I'd ever thought about or considered. For some reason, if I remember correctly, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they only sold vegetarian food at the 930 Club's little cafe, which was like right next to the stage. So there's this little window, and you would have to like stick your head in and scream at the people what your order was, while a band was playing. It was nuts. I remember first begrudgingly, and then after a while looking forward to eating their like veggie bean burger or something that they had. I had never had one before, but I just remember that first time, sometime really early on in those late 90s years of going to 930 Club and being disgusted that like they didn't just have like a burger and fries or chicken tenders. They just had like a veggie burger, and I was like, fine, I'll get it. And then I ate it, and I was like, I hate this, but I'm going to keep eating it. And the next time I got it again, and then over and over again, I was like, I guess I started associating it with the great time I was having at the shows. And then I started looking forward to it and missing it when I went off to college and wasn't able to get it anymore.
Oh, yes. I hate this. It is revolting.
More?
Please.
And yeah, those are just kind of some general things that come to mind. I'm sure other little anecdotes will drift into my head as I go through this, but let's get into it. Let's go ticket by ticket. Starting in 1996. So like I said, I grew up with a classical French horn playing musician as a father. So music was definitely not a foreign concept to me, nor were live concerts, but they were orchestras and ballets and operas and musical theater, stuff like that. However, I believe around 10 years old, my brother and I discovered Weird Al Yankovic through our best friend in elementary school who had one of his cassette tapes. And I mean, that was the beginning of the end, because at the time it was like the hardest thing I'd ever heard, other than like the more, old time rock and roll or Motown that we would hear on the oldie stations that my mom would put on sometimes when we were growing up in Buffalo, New York. But Weird Al changed everything, especially his Smells Like Teen Spirit parody, Smells Like Nirvana. It was the most intense and crass and loud, unhinged thing that I had heard at that point in my life. So a couple years after moving from Buffalo to Maryland, Weird Al was coming through, and my dad took my brother and I. That was my first rock show. That was my first seen a band. But it was so much more, because there were costumes, stage setups, props, and during costume changes, there would be these videos of those like fake interviews that Al would edit himself into with Madonna and all that back in the day. So it was quite an experience. And I remember people being dressed up. It was so much fun. And, at 96, that had to be about 6th, 7th grade, I'll say. Pretty sure it was somewhere around there. It was middle school for sure. I think I started growing my hair out at that point, wanting to be like Kurt Cobain. And I just remember saying, probably to myself, but maybe to my brother or my dad, if they play Smells Like Nirvana, I'm going to headbang. I was so excited. And they did. And I did. So this was on Friday, August 9th, 1996 at the Lisner Auditorium, which I don't even remember, and I don't recall ever going there again. It's on 21st and H Street, Northwest DC. That's what the ticket says, at least. So yeah, that was number one. Totally hooked. Now, it was a couple more years until I actually went to what I would say my first legit concert was, because at the time Weird Al was not considered cool when compared to Korn or Nirvana or Deftones or whatever. But Deftones were still touring on Around the Fur. I think it had been out for a little while, at least a year. And my brother and I discovered the Deftones on the Crow City of Angels soundtrack when they had their song Teething, and in the film as well, back when Chino had dreads. And at this point, my brother and I and our friend group were, full-on metalheads. So this was at the Capitol Ballroom, which was later, I guess, changed management and was turned to Nation. But I'm glad I got to go to the OG Capitol Ballroom, and this was Tuesday, April 14th, 1998, and it was Deftones, and there was one opening band. I think they were called Tin Fed or something. This was the first time my brother and I experienced a full-on mosh pit. That's one reason that I say Weird Al was definitely my first exposure to a live rock show, but Deftones was the first time being immersed in what was to come and being, exposed to the lifestyle that we were going to be leading for still. They started with Be Quiet and Drive, and as soon as the lights dimmed, the crowd pushed forward, and then the whole push forward thing was a new thing to us, so we had no idea what was in store. We were probably kind of in the middle of the floor. We were kids, and we were just shoved into each other. And I just remember the three of us looking at each other with these somewhat horrified but highly amused grins on our faces. I had no idea what was about to happen. And then Deftones came on and the place just exploded. I'll never forget that moment, and I'll never forget the feeling. It's just something that I miss and that I wish I could recapture in a way. Because like I said, shows of this kind that I've been going to in the rock and heavier music genre just have not been as jam-packed and as high energy. And I think, like I said, some of that is the bands that I'm seeing, more legacy bands, and the crowd tends to be older, and so are the bands. So I'm sure there's a lot of factors involved there, but that realness, that rawness, that kind of communal feel that we were all in this together, but also chaos, controlled chaos on the floor. It was something to behold. It was so special to me. I'll also never forget that my brother, I think, bought the CD of Adrenaline that night because we'd only been able to get our hands on Around the Fur at that point, and it was in a jewel case, and I think it made it through the night, even back in the floor pit area with, as far as I remember, it wasn't cracked or dinged or anything, so they just don't make them like they used to, I guess. All right, so we followed up that Deftones show with none other than Korn. We had a friend in 8th grade that introduced my brother and me to Korn before Follow the Leader came out. I think Life is Peachy had just come out, and I remember seeing it on cassette. I remember seeing that original cover, both covers of those albums, and being kind of freaked out because that was horrifying, and that was definitely like some of the hardest music. I mean, I heard Metallica and stuff, but Korn was at a kind of a different level of emotionality, and rawness. And so I actually don't think that I was super into it at first, because it was a little too, grunge was where I started, and this was the next step up. It was really intense. But my brother took to it right away, and I think it was that next summer, the summer after the Deftones show, that I remember actually listening to Korn's first album. Oh, I think it was probably the first two on cassette. I had my Walkman, and we were on a road trip out west. We had gone from like Yellowstone up the Rockies and out to a family reunion when my mom grew up in Nebraska. And I remember listening to the few tapes that I had over and over and over again. A couple of those were Korn, and that's where I really oh yeah. I specifically remember listening to Lies while we were driving through the Rockies, and there was a lightning storm in the distance, and there was something about that atmosphere that was so perfect. And I think that was the moment that I realized that I love Korn. So it was Halloween, Saturday, October 31st, 1998, that we were dropped off by my parents, my wonderful, gracious parents, at the Patriot Center at George Mason University for the Family Values Tour. And it was Incubus, Orgy, Rammstein, Limp Bizkit, and Korn, and everybody dressed up, and it was wild. I had never been to a show in an arena before, and it was amazing. And I could go on and on about it, because I'll just never forget how awesome it was. I remember like at one point the floor was closed, like the security wasn't letting people on the floor because it was too crowded, and I was like paranoid that I wasn't going to get down there for Korn. So I had to watch Limp Bizkit up in the bleachers, and they were all dressed like different eras of Elvis, and they came out of a giant spaceship and stuff. It was really clever. I heard one Incubus song on the Family Values compilation extra CD that they put out. I think like Best Buy had it when they first released Follow the Leader. I didn't get funk metal at the time, didn't know what to make of it, and so when I saw them live, and I remember they were dressed up as different cultures from around the world, and I really, really wish that I had known their stuff and cared back then, because they were touring on Science, and that's, I mean, I'm sorry, but it's my favorite album of theirs. I didn't know what I was listening to, and I didn't really pay attention, and that bums me out now. Like, hindsight's 2020. But Ice Cube was on most of that tour, but for some reason he wasn't on this date, so that's why Incubus was there instead. And then Rammstein came out. Let's say that they had their instruments and a little bit of duct tape on their bodies, and that was about it. And it was interesting. I mean, Rammstein is known for their shenanigans and their theatrics and their pyrotechnics and everything, but because it was the Family Values Tour, it was an under 21 show. I don't know exactly what happened, but they got kicked off the stage after only 4 songs. But I did get to see some of the amazing pyrotechnics and theatricality that they brought to the stage. I was really excited for that. Really bummed that they left, but they were great while they were there, and it wasn't too long until I saw them again. We'll get to that in a minute. And then I already mentioned Limp Bizkit, and then Korn was they were all dressed like different 80s styles, and there's actually the Korn Family Values videotape that came out back then. They have a lot of footage from that show that I was at. Something really clever about the setup of the show, especially because most of the bands were doing like pretty big stage designs, is that they had a rotating stage so that one band could be setting up while the other one was playing, and then they would rotate it. So things moved pretty quickly that way. But what this culminated in the end was Limp Bizkit and Korn playing both full bands together, all in the family. So there were like 2 drum kits and multiple guitars, and it was like wild madness up there. And I guess since it was Halloween and everybody was already like in a mood, if I remember correctly, they started attacking each other with, I don't know, I think it was probably Silly String. I don't think they actually finished the song. It just evolved into like friend shenanigans, which was so much fun to see. I love it when you see bands that you can tell they're not just on tour because it's their job, but they like really enjoy it. They're having a blast with their friends. One of the best endings to a show I've ever seen. All right, so moving right along. So that was on Halloween 1998. So skip to January 17th, which was a Sunday. I'm only reading that because it's on the ticket. The day of the week doesn't matter. But I guess it kind of does, because like it's giving me an impression about how many like weeknight shows I went to and how often I was just like beyond exhausted at school, but going to shows was the priority. So, and I remember this was a birthday present from my friend Jason that I mentioned earlier, that we went to a lot of these shows with. And for some reason Dave didn't go, and I don't remember why, but Jason got me tickets to see none other than the legendary, the epic, the one and only Vanilla Ice, baby, at the 930 Club on Sunday, January 17th, 1999. This must have been my first time at the 930 Club, if I remember correctly. And, this was when Vanilla Ice was doing his Limp Bizkit rap rock thing. He was getting on that bandwagon. I was for probably like a year and a half after I got that album, even though I got a lot of flack for it. Having been to that show, which was a great show, it was a lot of fun. Rob Van Winkle is a great performer. I totally see why he was a star. He was so energetic, and he's a really good rapper. Like, he could flow really well. When he was, there were a couple times where he just like came out. I don't know if he was freestyling or not, but he was rapping with his DJ, or maybe the band was kind of taking a back seat, or maybe there's a drummer. I just remember being pretty impressed that, he was good. He was definitely better than like Fred Durst. But yeah, I eventually acquiesced. And back in the day when they actually had like buy and sell CD stores, I remember selling a few things, including Limp Bizkit's Significant Other and Vanilla Ice's, I think it was called Hard to Swallow, his rap metal album. But having seen him, I was defensive of, being made fun of for liking Vanilla Ice and seeing Vanilla Ice. I don't remember exactly why that was my birthday present in particular. I don't know if it was kind of like a little bit of a joke, or if we really wanted to see him. I'm pretty sure that at the time I really wanted to see him. And that was a lot of fun. Like, I knew Vanilla Ice from Ninja Turtles' Secret of the Ooze. But other than that, I wasn't like a fan of his or anything. I only knew, like the couple of hits that he had back then. So this was like really seeing him fresh and with an open mind. Like, I didn't really know what to expect. And I just remember it being a killer concert. And I remember we had unexpectedly ran into another friend from our high school there, and we just had like a blast. So much fun. So later that spring, on Monday, April 12th, 1999, was my first time seeing Fear Factory. Fear Factory was another one that it took me a little while to appreciate. I had heard a little bit of their stuff, and I just wasn't quite ready for that style. But then my brother got Obsolete, and I heard like, the groove of Edge Crusher, but also the really blast beaty, syncopated kick drum kind of stuff. The groove mixed with the speed and the precision and the atmosphere and everything, it all came together for me. And I was able to go back to Demanufacture and realize that I was an idiot, and it was amazing, and appreciate Soul of a New Machine. And then I've been a lifelong Fear Factory fan ever since. I still have followed them, and even their latest album, which was a huge controversy between the members, and apparently like they're barely a band anymore, or it's mostly just Dino. Still love them. They're great. I've seen them so much now that I don't have any specific memories of that show other than just loving it. I remember like always being really, really floored by Raymond Herrera, their drummer. Because of how fast and precise he could pull off everything live. But I wish I can remember who else was on that particular tour. And then a few months later, on Tuesday, June 1st, 1999, got to go finally see a full set from Rammstein at now the newly branded Nation, which had been the Capitol Ballroom. And it was the same place, just with the new name. And it was at a club. So, first time I saw Rammstein was at an arena, and they pulled out all the stops. They had all the, flame retardant jackets to the like laser eyepiece to like flaming arrows that went through the sky and everything in between. They played for a couple hours, and they did everything. One of the songs off their second album, there's a female vocalist. She was there singing in a cage of fire. I remember there being a lot of really tall, crew-cutted blonde gentlemen. Not sure exactly what that was, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was some German folks that like to follow them around. I was so close to the stage, not quite at front, but I was close enough that I remember feeling my eyebrows get a little extra singe from some of the pyrotechnics that were going off. They really followed through with their intention of letting their music be a feast for the ears and the eyes. I think that was kind of their calling card. All right, back at 930 Club, about a month and a half later, Wednesday, July 14th, 1999, first time seeing Soulfly. Oh man, Soulfly, like other than Fear Factory and Deftones, Soulfly, I've lost count. And I've seen them at 930 Club a couple times, and I just associate 930 Club with Soulfly in particular because they would always pack that place, and it would always be a killer tour with like great opening bands, and Max and the crew would just command that place. This ticket is signed by somebody. I don't remember exactly who, but I want to say, I can't remember if it was, I think it might have been, was it Johnny Santos from Spineshank? That might have been that show. I can't remember because I saw Spineshank a couple times open for Fear Factory. Actually, that first time I saw Fear Factory might have also been the first time that I saw Spineshank. See, I can't remember. They all get jumbled in my head, but somebody signed this ticket. It's just scribbles, so I can't read it. Soulfly, and the way that they would come out with like that kind of like jungle mesh stuff they'd have on their Brazilian flags, and the things they would do with like pulling people up from the stage to play that like drum interlude and stuff. I never got picked. I was often, near or in the front, and I just, and being a drummer, I was really hoping to get up there. Nervous about it, of course, but hoping to do it, and it just never happened, but that's okay. I know Max still loved me. I do remember though, one time Max threw a pick into the audience, and I don't remember if it was me or Dave or Jason, but one of us got it, and Jason ended up with it. So he had a signature Max Cavalera Soulfly pick. So that was pretty great. And if I think about, like I mentioned earlier, just that wave of people in the front bouncing up and down for 2 hours, Soulfly is really the band that comes to mind because they just had so much groove back then, and they were just such a bouncy band. I remember in that DVD that they put out around the Prophecy era, Max had said that he wrote Roots for that specific reason, to make people bounce up and down. And he stuck true to that with their debut album especially. Later that summer, about a month later, Saturday, August 14th, 1999, was one of the several times that Black Sabbath came through. And this was when they were getting along with Ozzy. If I remember correctly, this was Drain STH. I think they were Swedish, all-female band. And Godsmack was on that bill. I didn't, and I still don't like Godsmack. I don't have anything else to say about that, but Drain STH was great. And then Sabbath, I got to see Sabbath. I did get to see Ozzy too a few more times. One time that I'm not going to get to in terms of these tickets, but this was after college, but I got to see him on a solo tour where he was touring with In This Moment and Rob Zombie, and that was great. But he was also so out of it. He was like reading off a teleprompter for the lyrics of the songs, and he was really struggling to keep, on key. Like, it was cool seeing an iconic person like that, but it was also kind of, I don't know, it didn't ruin it, but it was like, oh man, it was just kind of sad to see him struggling like that. That's why I'm amazed that he's still going, putting out music and still playing shows, but good for him. I mean, that's awesome. But yeah, I'm glad that I got to see Sabbath, and I was supposed to see him again. I'll get to this one later, but Ozzy was sick that night. So that I actually got to see Ozzy with Sabbath, with the original lineup, was one of those just like unforgettable, timeless kind of things that I'm just really glad I got the opportunity to. And that was at the Merriweather Post Pavilion in Columbia, Maryland. I think that was my first time at an amphitheater show. All right, and then, I saw him twice in the same year. So on August 16th, on a Monday, 1999, was Fear Factory back at 930 Club. And I can't differentiate this one from the other times I've seen them there, but I'm sure it was a great show. Oh boy, here we go. So back at the Patriot Center, which is where I saw Korn. Oh man, I mean, I'm embarrassed in a way, but I also have a good excuse. So the ticket says Kid Rock, but I didn't go for Kid Rock. Now, I will admit that I got his album, was it Devil Without a something, I don't even care. That album, that new metal album, or the one that like was kind of popular around the new metal time with Ba Wada Ba, that marketing on that was really clever and deceptive, because I just assumed that he was like the next Limp Bizkit, and that's how it was marketed. And I remember getting the album and being like, I listened to it a few times. I tried to pretend that I liked it, but it did not stick with me. And I think that was another one that I had traded in when I gave back some CDs to our local record store called Record and Tape Traders, but didn't go for Kid Rock. On Saturday, October 30th, 1999. Oh wow, so this was a year, almost exactly a year from Family Values tour in Halloween 98. I didn't realize that, at the same venue too. So we went there to see Powerman 5000, who I did get introduced to pretty early on. I don't remember exactly how I discovered them, probably because Spider is Rob Zombie's brother, and that was like a marketing thing. Back then, other than Rolling Stone and Spin magazine, there were magazines that my brother and I would get at the grocery store, and cut the pictures out and read the mailing list stuff, and order shirts from, was it Rockabilia, I think it was called, but like Circus, and there were like guitar magazines. There was a heavy metal one, I don't remember what it was called, but yeah, they would feature bands like that sometimes, like up and coming mid-level bands like Powerman 5000. And so I was introduced to them with their first major label debut, Mega Kung Fu Radio, which is still one of my favorite albums ever. It's so creative and so different, so unique. Then they started doing their more like kind of new metal, but still theatric and very specifically them kind of sound with Tonight the Stars Revolt, and that was the album they were touring on. So we went to go see them open for Kid Rock, and we only stuck around for a few minutes of Kid Rock's set just to kind of see it, and then we took off. It was he's a good performer, and he is definitely a musician. He knew what he was doing, and there were like, girls dancing on stage, and I think he probably came out on a motorcycle or he had a big fur jacket and stuff. Like, it was very theatrical. I can see why people enjoyed him back then, but we were just like really turned off by it. It was pretty ridiculous. Not our thing, but Power Man was good. So about a month later, November 28th, 1999, on a Sunday, back at the 930 Club, saw Megadeth for the first time. I remember missing them on their Cryptic Writings tour, and I was bummed about that. And this was when they were on their Risk tour, so there was a lot of, that wave of sellout, and they've peaked, and this was their worst album, and all that kind of stuff. Controversy going into this show, but I remember hearing on the radio that when they were promoting the show that they were going to play mostly old stuff and hits, and they were there to rock or something. Like, they were trying to make sure that fans knew that they weren't just going to play Risk all the way through, which is kind of funny that, they didn't have confidence in that album, even when they first put it out. And it was cool seeing such a big legendary band in such a small venue, which was, I think, another indication at the time of, where they were around that Risk era. Because as far as I know, I think there's a really big tour arena. I don't think stadium, maybe an amphitheater tour happening this summer with like Megadeth and Lamb of God and Trivium and In Flames. You got some big names in there, so I know it's not just Megadeth carrying the tour, but I think they're definitely at that more, legend, nostalgia status, as opposed to where they were in the late 90s, which was a little bit more cult, probably, judging by the, the venue that they played, at least at that time. The only thing I really remember about this show, though, was there was an opening band called Billionaire, and nobody liked them. I don't remember what their music sounded like, but I just remember that like nobody was into it except for, that one guy in the front that was like obviously their favorite band, and people were booing them. It was pretty pathetic on the part of the crowd to behave that way. I've seen bands all throughout the years that I've really hated, but I don't think I've ever been outright mean to them. And now, being a performer myself, it's even more apparent and obvious how just unnecessary it is to act that way. Because people, even if you don't like what they're doing, they're putting themselves out there, they're trying, and I think they deserve the respect of an audience to, if you don't like it, just ignore them. But don't make them feel like they're not worthy to be up there doing something that obviously somebody enjoys, because they wouldn't be on the tour if they didn't. But anyway, I just remember the singer and rhythm guitar player broke a string like halfway through the set, and his guitar tech tried to bring out his standby guitar, and you could tell he made like a signal like, no, I'm fine, let's just get through this. And he just played the rest of the show with the broken string. Like, you could tell he was just trying to get through the set and get out of there. So that was memorable, maybe not the most positive, but Megadeth was great. And then finally, I was so ready for this. This is another one that's going to have an anecdote. I honestly thought I would blast through these a lot quicker, but memories are coming up, and this episode is, as usual, probably going to be a lot longer than I originally intended it to be. So if you've even made it this far, I really appreciate it. And there's a lot more to come, because we're still in 1999 here. Actually, this is the last one in 1999. This was Thursday, December 2nd, 1999, at the Baltimore Arena, which I don't even know what it's called anymore. This was Rage Against the Machine, finally. So ready to see them. And what happened, I remember, I'll never forget this show. This was their Battle of Los Angeles tour, and they were at their peak. And people were just like frothing at the mouth to see them. So I remember we had got like to the box office really, really early, because there weren't internet ticket sales at that time, I don't think. Or if there were, we weren't privy to that. We would always go get them from a Ticketmaster outlet somewhere. This one I remember was at a Macy's or something at our local mall. We got there early, we got our tickets, and they didn't say anything about there being a difference between seat tickets in the arena and floor tickets. They just sold general admission. So we just figured that general admission meant the floor. I mean, that's what we got when we went to the arena show for the Family Values tour at the Patriot Center. It was the same kind of thing. You just got general admission, and then, you could sit in a seat or go to the floor, but you didn't have assigned seats. They often had that on the tickets, that it had like a seat number, but I think they just did that by default. For what we were used to, we weren't expecting that when we actually got there, there were like assigned seats, and we were way up in the back. I remember like kind of in the back center. We were really far away, and this floor was only half full. You could tell the seats were all sold out. I never got confirmation of this, but my friend's assumption or our inkling about what went down was that because Rage was, so politically incendiary, that they were trying to avoid any kind of like riot situation or whatever. And they sort of clandestinely and manipulatively limited the amount of people that would actually have floor seats. It backfired in a way. There wasn't a riot or anything, but people were noticeably upset about this. People were yelling at security. They were trying to get on the floor. We saw several people from our vantage point try to rush the floor, and they would get tackled and taken down and dragged out. So you could tell it wasn't just a mistake on our part. It was intentionally done that way, and we weren't the only ones that didn't realize that you had to ask for floor tickets and it wasn't advertised. So that was really messed up. It added, to the damn the man, atmosphere that Rage brings anyway. So in a way, it kind of enhanced the show. I remember being really angry and resentful of authority and the whole situation during the show, but it, as they played Killing the Name and all that kind of stuff, it definitely added something. So that was an experience. Lo and behold, we're back at the 930 Club on Wednesday, February 9th, and now we're officially in the 2000s. Y2K had come and gone, and we were all still alive as far as I know, unless, the simulation just wanted us to think that. But this was my first time seeing Machine Head. Again, I was so primed for this. So quick story about Machine Head. I don't remember exactly how I even heard about them, but we got into them during the long break in between More Things Change and The Burning Red. So, we were only familiar with Burn My Eyes and The More Things Change, and also their aesthetic and everything, and the more kind of groove metal mixed with thrash, hardcore kind of stuff. And even though I was totally 100% into nu metal and rap metal, I did have a certain expectation for what Machine Head was and wasn't, and I wasn't expecting Rob Flynn to start pseudo rapping on some of the songs. So when Burning Red first came out, I was kind of disappointed, and I could go on about Burning Red forever, but it's one of my favorite albums of all time, especially apart from Machine Head's catalog, but also within it. I know Machine Head gets a lot of flack in a lot of ways for being chameleons and going where the trends are and everything. That could be debated all day. I don't think they're the only band that you could say that about either, of course. And I know Rob Flynn has a big mouth and gets himself into a lot of trouble and controversy, but he's a personality, not just a musician, so I don't really try to let that stuff detract from my enjoyment of the music itself. And as for the music itself, The Burning Red, I think, is one of the quintessential, though not as recognized, nu metal albums, especially before nu metal became a commodity. I mean, we're talking 2000 here, so like I said before, things were starting to go downhill because Significant Other and Follow the Leader had come out, and nu metal had been grunged and hair metaled and all that kind of mainstreamed prepackagedness was starting. But Machine Head, obviously they saw where the trend was going, but they didn't just make a nu metal album. And this also really bugs me. I'll get to Slayer later, but it bugs me when people talk about Diabolysis and Musica as being their weakest album, because you can debate the songwriting and everything all day, but it sounds like Slayer. For instance, and I don't understand, I guess things are just different now with more access to everything all at once, all the time with the internet. But bands like Bring Me the Horizon that started out as, what my brother and I had once dubbed insane core, whatever you want to call it. They call it metalcore, but I don't see it as metalcore. I actually see old Machine Head more as metalcore because they were combining thrash and hardcore. Bringing Me the Horizon was just riff salad of everything. But then Bring Me the Horizon and Devil Wears Prada and all these, Asking Alexandria, they all switched formats several times, and they went from playing authentically heavy stuff to playing butt rock. How was that not following a trend? Sorry, I didn't mean to go off on such a tangent, but my point is that The Burning Red as an album, it's short and sweet and to the point, and it's creative. And of course, it was produced by Ross Robinson, who I think Ross Robinson, you can look at it from different perspectives about what his influence was with nu metal, but I think one thing that he was really good at for a time, especially during this era, was helping bands find their creative perfection. He really helped bring stuff out of these bands, everything from Korn to Slipknot and even Machine Head. He helped them kind of, break the chains a little bit of what their genre might have been restricting them to do, and he helped them, for better for worse, because there's some albums that he was on that are debatably derivative, but The Burning Red to me is a perfect example of everything kind of coming together and working perfectly at the perfect time. Judging by the more recent album Catharsis, where Rob brought up the Burning Red as a comparison a lot, which I don't really see that much. It's not a bad album. It just feels very bored and lackluster compared to the creative energy that they had going on with the Burning Red. And so anyway, going into the show, I don't remember exactly when the Burning Red came out, but I think I had a while to digest it before the show, and I was definitely a fan by this point. But it was also great, you know, they only had those 3 albums of material to draw from for that show, and they had lost Logan Matter at that point, and they brought in, I don't remember how to say his name, but their guitarist that was on that album, and Supercharger, and he had these super big, long, thick dreads. And I remember he was just like insane. His head was either way up in the air or almost like hitting the floor, very much, you know, like monkey kind of style in Korn. And I've heard a lot of criticism of him from, you know, Machine Head fans over the years on message boards and social media and things. But in my experience, he was a really exciting stage presence member of the band, especially, you know, because Rob's great, but he was stuck behind the mic, and there was some cool stuff that I think he brought to the table, even if, you know, people want to argue that he ruined Machine Head or whatever for a while. The guy could play, and he was at least a good collaborative songwriter. I just remember that show being like super awesome. I specifically remember Rob saying, you know, like, cheers to everybody for coming out on a Wednesday night. It was not a packed show by any means, but it was, the people that were there were like super into it and very dedicated fans, and Rob could tell, or at least act like he could. And that this started a thing that one reason I kept going back to seeing Machine Head, not just because I like their music, but because there was so much fun to see live, and Rob always really seemed to be sincerely appreciative of the people that would come. You know, he'd always stay after their encore for a while and just, you know, cheers with his beer and throw picks out and just, you know, thank people over and over again. He just seemed to have like a real sincere appreciation for the support, and, you know, I really connected with that.
Oh, one thing I almost totally forgot to mention was the opening act of the show is one of the most memorable opening acts I've ever seen, because usually going into shows, especially if I didn't know the band and they were good, just by nature of not knowing their material, I would always be a little bit bored. But there's been a couple major exceptions to that over the years. One of them was Reveille opening up at this show. They were a rap metal band that I really feel like didn't get the recognition that they earned and deserved. Reveille was just super solid, and they just handled the genre like perfectly, immaculately. Especially their second album, I feel, is really one of those like unsung masterpieces of that era. But I had heard them, my friend Jason, who I always talk about because he was basically a brother from another mother, he knew I was into stuff like Hed PE and Limp Bizkit back then, so he thought I would like Reveille. And I remember they had these listening stations at the local record store, Record and Tape Traders. And I listened to some of their first CD there. And it was okay. It didn't really blow me away or anything. But seeing them play that material live was a whole different experience. Even though I didn't know any of their songs in particular, their stage presence was almost unmatched. Except for a time that I saw Static X almost steal the show from Fear Factory. Reveille was just like mind-blowingly engaging. They had so much energy, and their sound was just so catchy and groovy, beat-driven. And the two guitarists especially, they had to be twin brothers because they looked exactly the same. They had like long curly blondish hair and glasses, and they were both like Dillinger Escape Plan style, like losing their minds the whole time.
So I remember that being a super fun show. And then the next ticket I have is for the famed but now defunct HF Festival 2000. So this was Sunday, May 28th at FedEx Field in Washington, D.C. And there is a story here. So strap in, because this is going to be a series of anecdotes, and I would be remiss not to include some of this information because this is one of the most memorable days of my life. So first of all, for anybody unaware, WHFS, which I think it was 99.1, WHFS was one of the 3 major rock stations in the DC Baltimore area. There was 98 Rock. They played a lot of like hair metal level of kind of class. It was classic rock to, you know, me and my friends at the time. But they also played a lot of more, you know, like current rock. They were more rock oriented, though in more recent years, I've heard a lot of metal on there, like Slipknot. And then there was DC 101, which was more of like your typical grunge alternative station. So they played what you'd expect, everything from Nirvana to Presidents of the United States, Green Day, and that level of stuff. So they didn't have like the hair metal or like the Metallica that 98 Rock did. So there was a good kind of balance there. But then 99.1 was like the best of everything to us because they played like Korn, they played Deftones, I remember the first time I heard Change in the House of Flies was premiered on, I don't know if it was an exclusive premiere, but it was the first time that I heard it on 99.1 HFS in the car while I was driving. But they also played a lot of stuff that DC 101 did, like STP and Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and all the alt rock stuff at the time. They were kind of like a good mix of all that stuff. They were one of the first radio stations that really, like, you know, before I was allowed to go buy a lot of the albums and things in middle school of bands that I wanted, I was able to at least record a lot of good stuff. I remember I had all these like compilation cassettes that I made from recording them on cassette tapes off of the radio, and it was usually HFS or DC 101 where I was getting that stuff from. Nirvana and Green Day and stuff like that. So they had a long-running festival, as far as I know. Just one of your, you know, typical radio festivals where a huge lineup of current trendy bands and some more, you know, legend status kind of stuff. I had heard about it and I hadn't gone yet, so this is my introduction to it, and let's get into how this all went down. So it started with the night before. My brother and I were at a party with friends, and he had decided to stay the night at the party and go with those friends to the show, and I was going to meet him there. Then we were going to meet back up and go together. So I went with another friend, I believe, and we were supposed to meet at the front gates. We didn't have cell phones at this point. This is 2000. I think I had a pager for some reason at some point briefly, but I didn't really use it that much. But we just didn't have access. My parents didn't even have cell phones. So we had no way to get in touch with each other after that morning of being separated because of that party. I remember walking around the perimeter of the field several times looking for my brother and not finding him. The issue was I had the tickets, and that was something we didn't think about the night before. We were just going to meet up and go together. If we had all had our tickets on us separately, it wouldn't have been a big deal, but we didn't. So eventually I just went in, and I hoped that I was still kind of walking the perimeter. This was really early, of course, because we always went to shows early, so I don't think anything was playing yet. But I kept walking the interior of the perimeter inside the gates and, you know, looking out and hoping to see him. And I never did. And finally, I ran into him and our friend Jason just totally randomly, and, you know, I was like, how'd you guys get in? And they had bought tickets off a scalper. We were reunited, and we were like, okay, let's go enjoy the show together. And I remember we went and saw some stuff. The other thing that was going on that day was the weather. This was end of May in Maryland, but the weather can be, you know, in spring and the mid-Atlantic can be very unpredictable and can change with the drop of a hat. I went in shorts and a t-shirt, and it was like overcast and rainy. I don't think it ever poured rain, but there was some condensation coming down periodically. And I just remember being like frigid, freezing. We were wet and we were out in the open. You know, the warmest place to go at the time was down on the field where all the bodies were. And I remember at some point in a mosh pit kind of situation, I picked up somebody's like windbreaker off the ground, and nobody claimed it who was around. So I was like, oh, sweet, I got a jacket for the day. Looking back at that now, like, that was like the grossest thing. I wore this jacket that I picked up off the ground. Who knows where that came from or what its story was, but it's good that I don't, I'm sure. I don't think I kept that jacket either. I think I got rid of it, but I'll never forget that jacket that saved me that day. So at some point, for some band that I think like my brother and Jason wanted to see and I didn't, we split up again, but we said, okay, if we don't see each other, we're going to meet at this time at this place, and, you know, we'll all go home together at least. So we had that down. We were trying to do better than we did for planning things from the night before. But then I went off with another group of friends that I ran into. And one thing I remember was we were so cold and wet at one point. We were just kind of walking the stairwells, and we were just going up and up. I think we were just trying to get up to the top for some reason. We were going up the stairwell at some level, and there was like a guy in a, you know, security poncho standing outside a door, and we were just like, oh, hey, can we go in here? Because we thought it was like a balcony or something. We didn't realize it was like one of those enclosed boxes. It looks out over the field with, you know, floor to ceiling windows, and they had bar and food, and it was warm. And the only reason we found that out was because when we asked to go in the room, the guy said, yeah, slip me $5 each and I'll give you guys a wristband. And we were like, we didn't even know what that meant. So we were like, okay. We gave him $5 and we got a wristband, and then we were able to go in and out of the, you know, sort of like VIP ticket holder box area for the rest of the day. So that was unexpected and amazing. And that coincidental, naive thing we did kind of saved us from the weather that day too. So as for the show though, this was like the new metal year. I had heard that HF Festival was typically, you know, pretty alt-rocky, and there were some alt-rock bands there, of course, but this was like Stained, Deftones.
Cypress Hill was there doing their rap rock thing. You want to be a rock superstar?
Rage was headlining. I think POD played, maybe Godsmack. I don't know. It's all a blur now of that, but I remember like the biggest draw for me, of course, was Rage and Deftones. It was a big like alt metal, alt rock year because that's what was in the mainstream. That was what was all over MTV and the radio. So, and it was the first time I got to see Deftones had not quite put out White Pony. It came out later that summer, but Change was on the radio, so I knew that one song. Well, I'm pretty sure they played like Be Quiet and Drive and My Own Summer. They at least played Change and probably a couple other ones off of White Pony that I didn't know what they were at the time. Bands only got like half an hour, so I played like 6-ish songs, but I remember it just being so amazing. Oh, and another little anecdote from that. So my band Minion at the time, who you'll hear more about later, we had our little cassette recorded single microphone from a tape recorder demo CDs, burnt CDs in my pocket that instead of like passing out to people, I had the idea of throwing them on stage to bands to see if we could get signed. Like I would throw Kinko's printed super low res pictured, CD on stage, and Chino would, oh, what's this? And like pick it up and be like, oh yeah, look at these kids. This is definitely the next thing. I'm going to pass this up to Mavericks executives. Oh, I can't help but look back and smile at how adorably naive I was, how hopeful, optimistic. But yeah, I threw a CD up on stage, and of course Chino never saw it, or Chi or anybody. So it's like, well, at least I tried. But I remember they were awesome. So STP was playing before Rage was supposed to headline, and I'll just never forget. I was way up in the nosebleed seats. My group of friends had left or gone to do something else, and I was gonna just go see Rage on my own, if I remember correctly, and then meet up with my brother after. And I got to see STP in all their crazy glory. And it was the only time I ever got to see them. And I'll never forget, like when they were playing Flush, that from the humidity and the coolness in the air, there was all the steam rising off the crowd on the floor. It's very ethereal. The whole place was singing, and it just felt like this really communal, like spiritual kind of thing that I hadn't quite experienced yet because I've seen mostly smaller shows. I remember being really like focused and taken aback on like how amazing it was to have all these thousands and thousands of people all singing along to this song that, had different contexts, but the same powerful impact on everybody's life. And it was just so serene. Rage closed out the show, and they were great again. Having seen them twice in a matter of months. And then I proceeded to go to our meeting point with my brother because we had said after Rage, meet here. And I swear I sat there for a while waiting for him. And, I was on the floor, so I figured that if I had got there by that time, then there's no reason that he wouldn't have been there. He would have been stuck in the crowd or something, because if he was in the floor, that was the last part of the crowd to get out into the parking lot. He never showed, at least from what I knew. So I left. I get home, and this is, I don't know, midnight later. I get home, and my parents are like, "Where's your brother?" And I'm like, "Where's my brother?" So then you can guess what happened the rest of the night. We called the security, or I think we had to call the police that connected us to the security at the stadium. And lo and behold, Dave was there in some waiting area with, probably dozens of other people that were in similar situations. Cops apparently said it happens all the time. It's crazy to me to think, but it's also like, if you're talking like tens of thousands of people at an event, people are going to get lost and left behind and, drunk and forget where their car is and all that kind of stuff. So we had to drive all the way back, shamefully and sullenly, all the way back to DC that night in the middle of the night to go get my brother. And it was the worst. And looking back at it now, it's hilarious. But at the time, we were in so much trouble, and I felt like an idiot, and he was mad at me, and I didn't blame him. Apparently what happened was he was just stuck in the crowd trying to filter out of the floor, and I didn't wait long enough, and it just made me feel worse, and I felt so bad leaving him there all alone. And apparently he had been offered a ride by Jason or his parents, whoever was picking him up, and he had declined, saying, "No, my brother's going to be here. We said we would meet here, so I'll see you later." And then there's the rest. So yeah, that was one of the most memorable concerts in all the best and bad ways. But either way, I'll never forget it. Now, I mentioned a minute ago that White Pony hadn't quite come out when Deftones played at this show, but it did later that summer. And then we saw them on Thursday, June 22nd, 2000 at Nation, which again was previously Capitol Ballroom, where we saw Deftones the first time. So this was like a kind of full circle, going back to where we started. And, this time we were all way more prepared for how it was all going to be. And I just remember it being amazing. I remember they had a really cool backdrop of like a big pony poster thing, and it had a bunch of holes punched in it and light shining out of it, so it looked kind of like in the Incubus song.
The sky resembles a backlit canopy with holes punched in it.
I just remember that being an epic night. Chino was wearing like a suit and tie, and so he was all cool. And this is when he had that like shaggy hair. He was doing his little dance up on the monitors. You know, he was a lot more kind of playful than aggressive like he used to be. And I'm glad I got to see him in those different eras. But I also remember another anecdote about this show was that earlier that day, the Deftones, because they were in town, were doing a signing at our local record chain called Record and Tape Traders, which was where I got most of my seminal music at the time. Our friend worked for that company, so she had managed to get herself on the shift at this store. This was in Annapolis, even though the store that we spent most of our time in was in Glen Burnie, Maryland, which is outside of Baltimore. But there was a bigger one in Annapolis, and that's where the Deftones were doing their signing. And like I said, our friend who worked there managed to do her shift at that store so that she could see the band too and kind of like be part of the whole experience. So we got to hang out with her while she was working, and we stood in line for hours. The line was huge, I remember, and we were out in the sun for hours, and of course, being completely invulnerable teenagers, we didn't think about like any sun protection or anything. So I remember by the time I got to the show, we were all like burnt to a crisp, and I didn't have like sun poisoning, I don't think, but I was really, really dehydrated. And then of course, trying to experience music the way that I preferred to, which was in the crowd with all the heat and energy and sweat. And I remember sitting on the disgusting sweat and beer filled floor afterwards, like just trying to like not pass out after the show because of the heat and the sunburn and everything. But I did get to meet the band that day, and it was really cool. Chino didn't look up, but I did gush at Abe for being like the most amazing drummer ever, and he seemed sincerely appreciative of that. And then Stefan made fun of Chino with our friend had done a portrait of Chino from like the Around the Fur days, and Stefan had said something about like, oh, that was skinny Chino before he looked like he has an apple in his mouth. So maybe that's why Chino didn't look up. He was upset that Stefan, of all people, was fat shaming him. And she was really nice too, and I'm so glad I got to meet him, before his accident 8 years later. All right, and now another festival that I went to that summer was at the Nissan Pavilion, which is the Jiffy Lube Pavilion now in Bristow, Virginia, Northern Virginia, essentially. And this was Friday, July 14th, 2000. So this was also my first Ozfest. I think my friend Jason had gone to a couple before that, at least 99, if not 98. And I remember hearing about them. I know that Megadeth was on one and Pantera was on one. We were just so stoked for this. I remember being so excited for this. I couldn't sleep the night before, and I was wired the next day. I was just totally like out of my mind, sleep deprived, but also like so full of adrenaline and excited that, it didn't, I don't know if it added to it or detracted from the experience, but I just remember being really, really amped up. And this was, again, like another big new metal year, because this was the new metal year. I don't remember everybody in this lineup. I could look it up, but I'm not trying to just spout stuff from Wikipedia. I'm trying to go from my gut here and just go from my memories. But Static X was on the main stage, I believe. So that was amazing. Incubus was there that year, and I have talked about Incubus on other episodes of the podcast, so I won't get too much into it, but I think this was a point where I started to kind of come around on them. I had heard more of their stuff, and I didn't hate it, but I wasn't like a huge fan at that point. But I remember them being really good live, and I love Brandon had this huge hand drum that he played. But this was during their really extensive Make Yourself tour. Yeah, they were awesome in terms of the performance, even though I didn't know all their music at the time. And man, who else played that year? I mean, it was that whole lineup of all the good new metal. The one experience that I'll never forget from that was, it was kind of a combination of things. So Soulfly was headlining the second stage, and this was just before they put out Primitive. And I remember specifically playing two very distinct songs that were a little bit different than what was on their self-titled album. So they played Primitive and they played Boom, and I remember falling in love with those immediately. Oh yeah, and Max had like his big pink dreads at that point, so that was fun. And they were just, Soulfly at that time was so commanding, so all-encompassing. The whole crowd was reacting to them. The whole place was moving out in this big field. It had also been another rainy day, and the pit was just a total mud pit. I mean, people were like mud sliding down hills, and I remember just being like totally covered in mud. That was so awesome because it just added to like this very primal, back to the primitive feeling of that whole show was just incredible.
So the big act before the Ozman took the stage was Pantera, and I was so stoked because Pantera was like, a new level for me of, I don't know, intensity and brutality to music, because, I started out exposed to like grunge and alternative, and then I met Metallica and Where Have You Been All My Life, in terms of thrash and speed and just the hardness that I found on their earlier stuff, of course. But like a lot of people, Metallica was my gateway into Pantera, and then Sepultura, Slayer, and so on. But Pantera, they were legends, and so excited to finally get to see them. And I wish I had more to say about this performance, especially being my first time seeing them. But Phil was so drunk that even though the rest of the band sounded amazing, Phil could barely make it through a song without sitting down. I remember during Effing Hostile, he was like sitting down on Vinny's drum riser and just like mumbling. It was ridiculous. It was really disappointing. So let's just move on.
I'm pretty sure that this was an Ozzy performance, not Black Sabbath, and he was not playing with Zakk Wylde. He was playing with I forget his name, the younger guy, the guy that was after Zakk Wylde. And he had this huge hell set up on stage. It was all like, fire and brimstone kind of stuff that was like all the way up to the rafters. And Ozzy had contraption that he would sit in, and it would lift him up, and he had a fire hose. So he would spray the hose over the audience. I remember during several of the songs, the whole place was singing and everybody had their lighters out. So just like that HF Festival experience, I remember looking around at one point during one of the ballads. I can't remember. I think it was probably like Mom, I'm Coming Home, something like that. Everybody had their lighters out. Everybody was singing. The whole place was focused, on that moment, and it was just one of those unforgettable moments, those powerful moments that only music can do. I think Ozzy got to play most of his set, but I'm pretty sure there was like major thunderstorms that rolled through at that point, and they had to like clear the field for safety, and people were like mudsliding down where the field was behind us. I was in the pavilion, and I'm glad I was, because it was like insanity out there. I can't remember if the show got truncated or not, or if it was just we were driving home in the rain. But I'm pretty sure that they cut it off like a little bit earlier than it was supposed to be. But I think Ozzy got to play most of the set. So that was an amazing Ozfest experience. And then going right on from there, the next ticket that I have, at least, it seems like a big gap. I'm sure I went to other shows in between. But Sunday, October 2nd in 2000, saw Soulfly back at Nation, which was where we saw that Deftones show couple months before. And I guess because a lot of bands put out albums in 2000, including Soulfly and Deftones, back at the Patriot Center, Sunday, November 26, 2000, was Deftones, and I'm pretty sure that this was one where they were touring with Taproot and Incubus. And I still don't even know what to say about Taproot. I don't know if I know any of their material at this point. I don't remember if we even saw them that day. But at this point, I was a big Incubus fan, probably because of that Ozfest earlier that summer. And I finally was like, okay, I've now seen them live twice, and I've heard their stuff, and I actually need to like listen to it. And I really got into Make Yourself, especially. And then I went back and got into Science, and they were still touring on Make Yourself. I don't think it was a co-headlining show, but I know they played like a much longer set than an opening band would have, because they were pretty popular at that point. They weren't Deftones level, but they were well recognized. I remember when I don't know if it must have been the same year, like Little Nicky came out, the Adam Sandler movie, and Deftones and Incubus played some acoustic songs
on an MTV promotional show for the movie
with Adam Sandler, including the Deftones rendition of Be Quiet and Drive, which was not credited. The composition was done by Jonah Matranga from Far, because he was, Far and Deftones were both from Sacramento, and they knew each other. And all this is laid out in Jonah's book, if you're interested, called Alone Rewinding. You can see that at jonahmatranga.com. But anyway, they, instead of Jonah being there, they got to play it with Incubus and Adam Sandler, and that was freaking cool. I'm sure it's on YouTube. I think I have an old like VHS recording from MTV when they first aired it. But yeah, Incubus and Deftones together was like perfection, and this was still on that White Pony tour, and I just remember it being fantastic. So we are now in 2001, Sunday, February 11th, 2001 at 930 Club. Saw Fear Factory again there, and this ticket has Kitty listed, so I wonder, it says Fear Factory / Kitty, so this might have been a co-headlining tour. And all the Fear Factory shows are at 930 especially are kind of mushed together in my head, so I don't have any distinct highlights from this one. But the next one at the Bender Arena in Washington, D.C., which was at American University, this was a pretty big deal for me because, I started out with like kind of alt rock and grunge being my major entry point into the world of rock. And then once I moved on to metal, there was a lot less interest in those former genres, but I had a good friend that kept pushing Weezer on me until I came around to them. So this was that period in between Pinkerton and the Green album coming out. I think the Green album was just about to come out, and so that was like their big triumphant return. And this friend had seen them at 930 Club, and he said that they were touring to see if there was any residual interest in people seeing Weezer anymore after how long it had been since Pinkerton and the reception of that era of their music. And he said it was sold out and it was magical. So they were coming back around with another tour, and this is the most unique ticket that I have in this collection, which you can see on my Instagram at Breathing Underwater 1. It's not just your standard Ticketmaster ticket. It's like glossy. It has imagery on it. I guess it was hosted by Yahoo Out Loud, whatever that was. And it was like some kind of specialty ticket. So they were really making a big deal about this Weezer return. And it really was, I remember it being a pretty magical night. The whole experience is like really fun, like seeing these legends in a way that were being resurrected or resurrecting their career. They weren't the punchline that they are now. And also they had the Get Up Kids opening for them. So this opened the door to a couple different things for me, Weezer being one of those things, but then also what was being dubbed emo at the time. Get Up Kids, were one of the bigger names of that movement at the time, but I had no exposure or interest in that kind of music until I heard that there was a band called the Get Up Kids opening for Weezer. And I had a thing back then, especially because I worked at Circuit City at the time and I had a discount on music. I really didn't like going to shows and being bored through opening band sets, even if I thought they were pretty good, but not knowing any of their music. So I made an effort, if I knew who the opening bands were going to be, that I would try to get music by them so I could see if I, liked them beforehand and could get some of their stuff in my head before the show so I could, enjoy the whole experience more. And so I got something to write home about from the Get Up Kids, and wasn't really sure what to make of it at first. I hadn't listened to anybody with quite that vocal styling, but it opened up a whole door for me. That was a huge thing that was, exploding at the time. And I was just getting ready to go off to college, and that was a big kind of part of my formative college musical interest, was exploring more music like that. And we'll get into that in a minute. But the show was, Weezer was very showy and very epic. And I'd never seen a band do like 3-part harmonies in a rock realm before. All that stuff was really cool and unique. And then at the end of the show, I think it was during Surf Wax America, they exploded confetti over the whole crowd. And, it was all pretty wonderful. And on Wednesday, March 14th, 2001, I saw Pantera.
So even though I had just seen Pantera the summer before and it left a bad taste in my mouth, I was hoping for redemption because they were still on their Reinventing the Steel tour.
And this was at the Towson Center Arena in Towson University. I think the only time I ever saw a show there. And Phil had that big old beard. I remember they were great. Everything, that I wanted to experience about Pantera was present at the show. The problem was I wasn't present because I had eaten a whole bunch of Popeyes before I went, and I had like the worst indigestion, and I remember just being doubled over in pain and agony for most of the show. So that was fun. The next ticket I have on here is not a national touring show, but it is a legit ticket. It was from Ticketmaster. It was at The Vault in Baltimore, but this was some local bands from that area or that region. There was X-Rate, Neglected Life, Headspace, and Detain. Neglected Life were friends of ours, and we shared the stage with them a few times, meaning my band Minion, and our singer was friends with their singer. I remember them being really cool guys. They covered a Korn song. And then I remember being a big fan of Headspace. They had a woman front singer that had these awesome long black dreads. I wish I had any recordings from them at the time because I just remember them being really good, and I'd like to hear them again. Back in Towson, Maryland, on Friday, May 4th, 2001, got to see Static X. Pretty sure I saw them that summer before at that Ozfest, but this is the first time I got to see them headlining at a little club, because I think the first time I saw them was opening for Fear Factory, and they almost sold the show. So this was at the Wrecker Theater in Towson, Maryland, and it was awesome. Static X was so much fun live. This was on their Machine tour. I think they had just put out Machine. Like I can imagine White Zombie was back in the day. They were kind of a band that you could dance and headbang to at the same time. And then almost a year exactly from that sort of amazing debacle of a day at the HF Festival 2000, now on Monday, May 28th, 2001, was the 2001 HF Festival. And this year was, I think Stained was headlining over Live, which I found kind of obnoxious at the time because Stained only had like an album under their belt. And I know they were really popular, but live had been around for at least a decade, and I don't like live, but I remember being kind of insulted on the part of the band that they weren't given a headlining spot because they had earned it, and I didn't think Staind did. Now, I never liked Staind. I'm proud to go on record. I'll also say that I never liked Godsmack, even though I tried. I might like one of their songs, but I don't know. We'll have to go back and listen to it and see. But that whole like kind of ilk of like new metal-ish, I guess later became more like butt rock. It's just never my thing. But also that year, I remember there were acts like Coldplay, when Coldplay was actually like a rock band on their first album. I remember seeing them briefly. They played Yellow, and I think I caught like the end of Lifehouse was playing that year too, when they were touring off of I think it was called like No Name Face or something like that. I actually really like that album. I still have it. I never listened to them beyond that, but I liked Lifehouse. They were nice. Bloodhound Gang played that year. I remember that they came out all dressed as Fred Durst with the khakis, black shirt, and the backwards red baseball cap. So that was funny. Oh, and I remember one of my favorite local bands that I was sure was going to break out of the local scene at the time, even though they ended up breaking up before they broke out. But Margaret Heater, who I've featured on this podcast before, I don't know if they headlined, but they definitely, there was like a second stage, like a locals stage or something, and I think they headlined the local stage. Like they were at that status at that point, so that was fun. Oh, and that was the year that Stabbing Westward played. Just before they broke up, they were touring off of their self-titled album, and I remember having seen pictures of them, you know, in circus magazines and stuff. Up till that point, they were all emoed and black fingernailed and eye makeup and everything, but they all look like supermodels, or at least Chris did. He was wearing like tight red cords and was shirtless, and he was like totally ripped, and his hair was highlighted. And the rest of the band, they were wearing like fashionable stuff, not just like jeans and t-shirts. So they were definitely trying something different there, but I was so glad to get to see them before they broke up. Sunday, June 17th, 2001, I saw Fear Factory at Nation. This was after I graduated from high school. So yeah, that HF Festival was like probably just around graduation or just after. This is like my first show as a legit adult, I think. And I remember also that Slayer was playing the same night, so there weren't a lot of people there. And I remember Burton C. Bell mentioned of that. He was like, I know Slayer's playing tonight, but this shows us who like the real Fear Factory fans are. And they were touring off of Digimortal at the time, one of their more derided albums, but I still like it.
Oh yeah, and I just remembered that Puya was opening for Fear Factory at this show. And I had heard of them, maybe heard a couple of their older songs on compilations or something, but kind of like seeing Reveille the year before opening for Machine Head. I didn't know any of their material well enough to like engage with it on that level, but they were so good live, so energetic, so much great stage presence and like just fun energy. And they had the whole percussion line with the congas and everything to add all that extra texture and flavor and that traditional sound to their mix. I don't know whatever happened to them, but they were a super fun band to see live, especially cold.
And then a few days later at the Bender Arena at American University, I saw Green Day. First and only time I've actually seen Green Day. I remember that being a blast. A couple highlights are that, well, first of all, this was before American Idiot, because this was just 2001. They were touring off of Warning. And I tried to be a bigger Green Day fan. That was more like a middle school thing. I kind of didn't really stick with them, but I was suggested to go back and listen to like Nimrod and Insomniac again, and I did, and I appreciated them. And I really came around on Warning. To me, Warning is like the best songwriting of Green Day albums. I know it's not the most like punk or pop punk. There's even like some nylon string acoustic guitar. I remember like in the video for Warning, I think Billy Joe's playing a acoustic, but I think that's really cool that they tried something different, but still had the attitude. And the songs are just so good. They're all so catchy and tight and streamlined. And to me, it's like the perfect pop punk album because it's a very poppy, but it has that punk attitude. They were everything that I'd heard they were. They were fun and irreverent. And, you know, I've heard that they always bring people up on stage to like kind of play a song with them, to take their instruments and let the fans play with them. And one of the people that was brought up was the husband of the woman that I mentioned earlier that worked at the record store. At the time, they were just dating, so it was her boyfriend. And he was in a pop punk band too. And I could tell it was him because he had his green hair. He was pulled up on stage. He's a bass player, so he got to take over bass. And that must have just been like a major dream come true because, you know, I knew he's a huge Green Day fan and he got to like play the instrument of his favorite band. I think they played like half a song or something. It was really cool. I had a lot of respect for them after that show. And they trashed all their stuff at the end and you could tell they were really enjoying themselves. All right, so it looks like Green Day was my last show before I went off to college. So then I moved to New York City, up in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, like the Upper West, like Harlem side of Manhattan, to go to Hunter University. I had aspirations to be a writer, and I heard they had a good creative writing program, and I also just really wanted to be in New York. I didn't really care about the school as much as being in the city, you know, the place where everything was happening. There was nowhere else I could be. And one thing that happened before the show was, I was into Human Waste Project and Amy Echo, and she had started a band first called Hero, and then they changed the name to The Start, and they were doing a tour with Sugar Ray, of all people, and Uncle Kracker, two artists I really didn't like, especially when Sugar Ray made that radio-friendly change. But on those early days of fan sites and message boards I was talking about earlier, I met somebody that was also going to be going to that show. She lived in Yonkers, so we decided that we would, meet up at the show and meet in person. So she was the first person I knew in New York.
You were the only person that I knew in New York.
And we're still friends. Uncle Kracker and Sugar Ray were unwatchable, but the cool thing also was that the friend that I made that night from having talked to early that summer on a message board, she was friendly enough with Amy Echo that we met up with the band and they brought us backstage. So I actually got to see some of Sugar Ray's set backstage. And this was at the Hammerstein Ballroom in Manhattan now the band signed the tickets, so it's kind of hard to read, but I think it's Monday, August, I think it's 17th, 2001. All right, and then Saturday, September 29th, 2001. So the Start Sugar Ray show was just before 9/11, and this one was right after. This was in Jones Beach on Long Island, and it was Weezer again, and this time they were definitely touring off the Green Album, but they were still playing stuff off of Pinkerton at this point. I've heard that they don't play Pinkerton, or they haven't been playing Pinkerton stuff for like 20 years, but they played a solid amount of it on this one. And interestingly enough, The Start, the same band that I saw open for Sugar Ray, also opened at this show. So they were getting a lot of good tours back then. It's a shame they never got more recognition. And then Friday, November 16th, 2001, at the famous Roseland Ballroom, so I heard, I finally got to see Slayer for the first time. Never seen them before. And they were touring on God Hates Us All, which that was one of the albums that had come out. I think that came out on 9/11 or right around it, just like a few other, like Slipknot's Iowa and Machine Head Supercharger and Biohazard's Uncivilization. I remember it all come around that time, and they all had suffered album sales or distribution or even release, I think, because of 9/11. But Slayer pulled through, and I think they played maybe, I don't remember if it was like half a song or maybe like 4 songs, something like that, but they only played a little bit, and then for some reason that their soundboard was down on the floor, like amongst the crowd, and somebody spilled a beer on the soundboard. Everything shorted out and the mics went dead, and we waited around for like an hour and a half, and they finally went back on stage, but I don't think I ended up staying for much more. So my first Slayer experience was not as epic as I was hoping, but it wasn't too long at all before I was back at the Hammerstein Ballroom in Manhattan to see, well, the ticket says Fuel, but I went to see Seven Dust, who was opening for Fuel. I don't like Fuel, but I don't have anything against them. And Seven Dust was touring off their Animosity album, and that was Saturday, December 1st, 2001. So after that winter, I moved back home to Maryland for a semester because I had decided to not continue at Hunter in New York, but instead go study at a more specialized school in Philly for screenwriting called the University of the Arts. And even though I was living in Maryland at the time, I had people in Philly that I already knew that I was going to go to school with, so I would go up and visit them and go see shows. So my first introduction to the Trocadero Theater, which is like the National here in Richmond, it used to be like a theater. Not sure its history or how old it was, but it had all the ornate rafters and paintings on the ceiling and stuff. It was a really cool venue. And the first band I got to see there was Machine Head. At this point, they were touring off a Supercharger. And I mentioned their guitarist before. I think he had like cut his hair, and he was a lot more chill than the time I had seen him at the 930 Club a couple years before. But I do remember during White Knuckle Blackout, there's a certain sound in there that I thought was just something squealy they were doing on the guitar, but he actually had a power drill that he was playing through the pickup, and so I thought that was kind of cool. Very Tom Morello-y. That was Thursday, February 7th, 2002. So later that spring, on Friday, April 26th, 2002, I finally got to see Garbage. I was a huge Garbage fan, of course, but I never got to see them when they were touring off of their first album or version 2.0, but finally got to see them when they were touring on Beautiful Garbage. And this was the first time also that I got to go see the famed Electric Factory, which was more reminiscent to me of Nations in DC, because it was kind of like a long converted warehouse, very industrial, and I would end up seeing a lot of shows at these venues in the years to come, but Garbage was a great first time, and I remember getting all dressed up and glammed out for that one. On Wednesday, October 2nd, 2002, saw Soulfly at the Trocadero, which I'll refer to as a Troc moving forward, probably, because that's what we called it locally. All right, this one's an anomaly. I have a ticket at the same place, the Troc. This was on Thursday, October 10th, 2002, to see Hot Water Music, but I don't remember seeing Hot Water Music. I don't remember what this was for. I must have been seeing an opening band. It'll come to me later, but I don't think I've ever seen Hot Water Music. I only really knew about them because of their collaboration with Alkaline Trio. Well, that's kind of freaking me out. Why do I have this ticket? Maybe the show is canceled. Maybe Hot Water Music dropped off the tour. I can't recall what this was, but if I saw Hot Water Music, I'm sure they were great. But this is a really memorable show. On Sunday, November 17th, 2002, I saw Head PE. This was the second time I've seen them. I saw them at one of those Fear Factory shows at 9:30 back in high school, and I really didn't like them back then. There was something about them just didn't work for me, but at this point they had long put out Broke, and Broke had its Bartender, its radio hit, and I really got into them from Broke, and they were about to put out their third album. They played a couple songs off of there. I just remember, I think he still went by MCUD at the time, but Jared, the singer, he came out all like bulked up with all these jackets and shirts, and like in between every song he would take off a layer until he was finally shirtless. But it took him a while to get there. I'm not sure what that was all about, but it was kind of funny. They were amazing live. I reviewed a show that I went to almost about 10 years ago now, early on in this podcast, and they were still great at that point. So I'm glad I got to see them in all these different eras and that they've stayed solid that whole time. And that was at a club on South Street. If you ever watch Always Sunny in Philadelphia, there's a shot of South Street at the end of the credits. That was kind of like the St. Mark's Place of Philly, the cool street with all like the skate shops and record stores and, tattoo shops and stuff. So back at the Troc, saw Biohazard Thursday, April 10th, 2003, and they were great. Oh, and then of course I had heard about Warped Tours, for years, of course. I remember hearing about Warped Tour in high school, and I had a friend that had seen Far at the Warped Tour that year in like a parking lot, and I think Deftones had played too, and she got like a Far shirt that I used to steal from her and wear because just to live vicariously. But so I finally went to my first Warped Tour way late in 2003. This was at the Tweeter Center across the river in Philly. This was in Camden, New Jersey, on Friday, August 8th, 2003. I remember, I think that year it was like NoFX and Dropkick Murphys. I think there were some metal acts, but that was before like metal was a big part of the Warped Tour. I think there was mostly like punk and alt kind of stuff. Oh, it says on the ticket the show started at noon, so I just figured that like it wouldn't start right away, and I got there a little bit later, probably like 2 or something, and half the bands I went to see had already played. I wasn't familiar with the Warped Tour way of doing things, where they kind of gave like a little bit more of like equal time and different rotations to bands playing, so it wasn't just like the little bands didn't get, were playing early every time and nobody saw them. I guess things were shuffled around a little bit more, but like I remember Dropkick Murphys for one, I didn't get to see. I think Vendetta Red too, I really wanted to see, and I was really bummed I didn't get to see them, but I got a cool t-shirt from them. So I learned my lesson about Warped Tours after that. On Tuesday, August 19th, 2003, at the Troc, I finally got to see Reggie in the Full Effect, which is James Dewey's, the keyboardist of the Get Up Kids side project, and they did not disappoint. I've seen them a few times, and they always do the theatrics, and he does the different characters and the costume changes, and there's something about the keyboards with the heavy guitar that just is, to me, like the best thing ever. Okay, so little short story. There is a Unitarian church in downtown Philadelphia that has a big basement, and they were so cool and gracious. I think there was a local promotion production event company called R5 Productions that focused on like indie acts and smaller venues and stuff. I remember the church being like super cool about being a venue and an under 21 venue. It was one of the favorite places for Jonah Matranga to play when he would come through. I don't think I have a lot of tickets from a lot of the shows that I saw there because a lot of them were really kind of smaller scale kind of things. But they did have a lot of the more like low mid-level national acts come through. Stuff that probably could have played at the Troc or the TLA, which is the Theater of the Living Arts, Maybe not the size of the Electric Factory, but they probably could have at least not sold out, but played these smaller clubs just fine. But they would go through the church instead. And the whole thing was just like really cool and really DIY. They also put on a really fun punk rock flea market every year that I participated in a couple times, where it was just, you know, like kind of counterculture college kids selling their art or their old records or video games and stuff. It was really fun. That church really knew how to connect with their community in unique ways. They didn't shun the counterculture community. I guess that's kind of what the whole Unitarian thing is all about. But this was Anti-Flag. The first time I saw Anti-Flag, I think they were touring. They had just put out Terror State, and they were a lot of fun. The other bands on this ticket were Paint It Black, Pipe Down, and Thought Riot. But getting to see Anti-Flag first at a little club like that was definitely awesome. Back at the TLA, the Theater of the Living Arts, on Wednesday, October 22nd, 2003. It was called the Girls with a Z, Girls Garage Tour. And this was something that was put together to showcase up and coming, you know, female fronted or female oriented acts. And of course, The Start was one of the major acts. And I'm sure they were a big proponent of the tour in general. And then on Wednesday, November 19th, 2003, got to see the Deftones. And at this point, I think they had put out their self-titled album. One thing I do remember from this being, you know, such a fanboy was Chino had, I mean, I was used to him crowd surfing and things, but he put his leg out onto the crowd and like, I think everybody supported his foot. So he was kind of like crouching on the crowd partially. And I got to like grab his calf and like, you know, feel his sweaty, hairy leg. And I just, you know, it was one of those like never washing these hands again kind of moment.
I'll never wash this hand again.
I do remember being really, really put off by some big guy kept trying to like shove his way to the front. You know, I had got there with my friends really early, you know, so we could be up front at the bar, and we were there the whole time. And then as the Deftones came on, he decided that he was going to try to make his claim for the front, and it was really obnoxious just because, I don't know, it just felt like he didn't earn it. Now I know there's no rules on the floor, it's just everything goes more or less as controlled chaos, but I just thought it was really rude, and he was kind of like hurting me and my friends to like try to get us out of the way. And he was a big guy, you know, we didn't have a lot of like recourse, but we all made an effort to like kind of push him back, and he finally gave up. But you know, it was one of those things that was just not cool. Even in chaos, there's got to be some kind of etiquette, right? What I've seen, that was a big thing that drew me to the hardcore scene at first, was how cool people were with picking each other up and brushing each other off. There was like a balance between aggression and pseudo violence and community and friendship and stuff, and this was just going against all that, and it really, really bothered me. Still makes my hackles rise even now. Here's one with a good anecdote. This is in Maryland at Fletcher's. Fletcher's was the one in Fells Point, which was kind of like the cool area, like the South Street or St. Mark's Place of Baltimore, at least at the time. It was on Sunday, December 28th, 2003. The day before, Saturday, December 27th.
That was my and my twin brother Dave's 21st birthday.
This was a really small club, and Biohazard was coming through, and this was like our birthday present to ourselves. And I just remember the bouncer at the door was really suspicious of the fact that Dave and I both had IDs with the same birthday. He thought they were fake, and we had to convince him that we were twins, and we don't look alike to most people. There's definitely similarities, but he has like darker brown hair and I had lighter blondish red hair, so it took some convincing, but we eventually got to go in. I remember it being like pretty empty and kind of sad that a legendary band like Biohazard had almost nobody there, but I don't think there was any advertising for it. I think it was intentionally supposed to be kind of small and local, and they even mentioned that at the show. They're like, this is like the core Biohazard crowd or something. So we were glad to be a part of that. And then back in Philly on Wednesday, April 28th, 2004, saw Machine Head again at the Troc. But at this point, I'm pretty sure that they had gotten Phil in the band on guitar. So they were that solid lineup at that point, and they were moving past their derided supposed nu metal phase, which again didn't bother me as much as most people, but I really liked Through the Ashes of Empire, so it was a welcome change either way. Oh yeah, but then Sunday, August 8th, 2004, the ticket says Chimera and Machine Head, but this was Machine Head's 10th anniversary of Burn My Eyes. It was at the TLA on South Street, and Machine Head played Burn My Eyes front to back. The only one they didn't play live, they played as like an intro as they came out, was Realize, 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 because that's not really like a song. But man, it was so cool seeing like Block and all that stuff, because you know they always play the first track off of Burn My Eyes. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, and Old at their shows, but seeing the rest of that album performed was just mind-blowing. And I remember Chimera wasn't too bad either. I never really got into them, but I love, one of my favorite songs ever is fronted by the Chimera vocalist called The Enemy off of that 25th Roadrunners compilation album. Go check that out if you've never heard it. It's got some cool stuff on it. All right, so now back in Jersey, across the river, the Tweeter Center again. That was like where a lot of the Philly and I guess like South Jersey kind of festivals went. This was Ozfest 2004 on Thursday, August 26th. And that year I remember seeing like Hatebreed. They were going off of Rise of Brutality, and they were awesome. And Lamb of God, they were still touring off of Ashes of the Wake. I wasn't a huge Lamb of God fan at that point, but seeing them live did help. One of Phil Anselmo's side projects played that year. I don't remember what they were. It was one of the ones where it was like every song was like 30 seconds or a minute, and it was just like garbled nonsense. Slayer played. I remember it was early on, like Devil Driver was touring off their first album, so they played that year. I'm glad I got to see them back then because I really fell out of favor with Devil Driver after monotonous repetitive album after monotonous repetitive album of theirs. And God Forbid, like way back, I mean, this wasn't like their early days, but it was before they put out the Constitution of Treason, so they were still a little bit more metalcore and a little less just metal. Like God Forbid and Devil Driver were on like a second or third stage, and Lamb of God and Hatebreed were on like the second stage, and then like Slayer and Phil and Selmo stuff was on the main stage. And then that year was supposed to be Sabbath, but Ozzy had like bronchitis or something, and it was a co-headlining year with Judas Priest. So Halford did the whole like 2-hour Judas Priest set and then stayed out to do Sabbath's set. So it was Arrest the Sabbath with Rob Halford, and it was really unexpected and really unique, and we appreciated what it was. But halfway through the set, we were kind of like, well, this sounds like a really good Sabbath cover band. We kind of saw the novelty, and now we're just hearing Halford sing Sabbath songs, but we just saw like 2 hours of Priest, so we're good. And like I remember we had left early. I was like super sunburned that day, so I was okay to leave anyway. On September 14th, 2004, I saw Soulfly again at the TLA. And then back at the Troc on Sunday, October 17th, 2004. This ticket says Lamb of God / Fear Factory. I've only seen Lamb of God that one time at that Ozfest. I'm sure of it. There's no way I would have seen Lamb of God at the Troc and not remembered it. So I don't know what happened. Maybe Lamb of God dropped off that tour or something happened, but I know I saw Fear Factory, but there's no way that Lamb of God was actually, I don't know why they're on the ticket, but I do know that Lamb of God loved Philadelphia just because they like to call it Killadelphia. And at the Troc, again, saw the Deftones. This was Thursday, October 28th, 2004. The next one was at the Troc again. It's just like Troc after Troc after Troc. I saw the Soulfly, and it says Soulfly / Morbid Angel, so I don't know if that was like a co-headlining thing or something. I don't even remember seeing Morbid Angel, but I remember seeing Soulfly. And that was Friday, February 25th, 2005. And then on Friday, May 27th, 2005, I got to see Chino's side project, Team Sleep, which was really hyped up. I remember they had put out like a demo or something years before, and everybody was all excited about it, and then it kind of petered out and then came back. Seeing them live was a lot different than the record. The record's very, kind of spacey and ethereal, but they had a lot bigger sound live, even though they did a lot of the stuff. Something really bothered me about that show. A couple things. I remember one of the opening bands was an instrumental band. I mean, nothing against instrumental music necessarily, like instrumental rock music without vocals, but I remember physically, like seriously, not out of sarcasm or irony, but I was like falling asleep. It was just like these long prog songs that, I don't know, it's just not my thing. I need vocals to kind of bring it all together for the most part. And Chino is an amazing frontman, and that was kind of cool seeing him with a side project because he really owned the stage and owned the tone and tenor of the whole thing, just being who he is with his personality and showmanship and everything. I don't know if he was freestyling, but he did a couple like just drum and bass, like kind of rap numbers that weren't on the album, and he can flow. I mean, I knew that because of like Wicked on Life is Peachy and hearing him in other things, but seeing him live do it, like I wish that he would do a full on like rap or like rap rock side project because he's really good at that. And the other thing about this show that stuck out to me that I still remember is the drummer, the percussion. You can hear it on the album, but it was mixed better. The drummer was so wild and loud and big, and the music itself was not. You know, if you've ever heard Team Sleep or any of Chino's side projects, really, they're usually not that epic like the Deftones. And it was like the drummer was playing with a different band. He was like doing solos and going crazy and all these fills, and he had these big like trash can lid cymbals, and it was way out of place, and it was really distracting to me because it made the whole show feel wrong. It didn't sound right, you know, like, and it wasn't just the mix, it was just he was just too much for what the rest of the band was doing. I didn't quite get that. June 23rd, 2005, back at the Electric Factory, the bigger club in Philly, I got to see the Get Up Kids, and this was their, I don't remember if they had called it at that point, but I'm pretty sure this was their farewell tour at the time. So I was really excited to get to see that because I hadn't seen them headline. I just saw them open for Weezer several years before. And in that same vein, finally got to see Alkaline Trio at TLA. Like I said earlier, with the Get Up Kids kind of introducing me or getting me into the idea of stuff that wasn't just metal or grunge or what have you, I was opening myself up to this other side of rock that was a little bit less aggressive, but as tender and self-reflective and introspective as new metal, or at least early new metal was with like Korn and stuff. But that opened me up to like, you know, the Get Up Kids and emo, and that led me to more like punk emo at the time too, and just punk in general. So Alkaline Trio was a big star, and I still really love them. And this was at the TLA Sunday, June 26, 2005. As a band, they were good, but the mixing was really bad. All you could hear were vocals and drums. For some reason, the guitar was completely drowned out, and that happened again when I saw them later. And then I saw them again even later, and they sounded fine. So I don't know what was the deal with those couple times that I saw them, but they didn't sound very good live. And then there's this really cool, much smaller club. If for anybody that knows the clubs in Richmond or Baltimore, I would say this is more of like an auto bar or canal or camel kind of place, where it's a smaller club, but it has a good stage and a good vibe and everything. It was called the North Star Bar in Philly, and I got to see Vendetta Red finally, especially because I had missed them at that Warped Tour. So I got to see them, and they were touring off their second album, The Sisters of the Red Death. This was Sunday, August 21st, 2005. And they were wild, and they were awesome. And then even though I wouldn't have sought out this band on my own, but I had a friend that was really into the Decemberists. So she took me to see the Decemberists at the Electric Factory on Friday, October 7th, 2005. And I don't really like go back and listen and put them on, but I really, really enjoyed seeing them live. They were one of those rare bands that you could not know any of their music, but they were so good and engaging live that they just entertain you no matter what. And I remember they had a lot of like theatrics and showmanship. Somebody had big like whale jaw puppets that they were playing with when they're in a song we're supposed to be eaten by a whale. And I remember there was a song where they got us to all sit down on the floor, like the whole club sat down, and then there was kind of a build up into the bridge of the song, and they got everybody to like slowly stand up and then explode into dancing and stuff. So it was like really, really fun, interactive kind of show. At this point, so this is Sunday, October 23rd, 2005. I went with some friends to go see Soulfly at the Wrecker Theater in Towson, Maryland again. That was back where I saw like Static X back in the day. And Soulfly was touring off of Dark Ages at this point. And I remember Blood Simple opened for them, and I finally got to see Blood Simple because I never got to see VOD. So I was really, really excited to see Blood Simple, and they did not disappoint. I missed them. Similar to that Pantera show, I had some really bad indigestion because I ate a huge slice of like New York style pizza in Philly. Maybe that was a problem because I was eating, you know, New York style pizza in Philly instead of like a Philly cheesesteak like you're supposed to in Philly. I don't know. But I had really bad indigestion when I went to go see the Bloodhound Gang at the Electric Factory on Wednesday, October 26th, 2005. And they were good, but I couldn't enjoy the show very well because I was just doubled over in pain. Jimmy Pop at one point said like, hey, we played, you know, the last time we played here, we sold this place out for like 2 nights in a row, and now it's only half full. Like, what's up? Like, he was kind of complaining about the crowd size. And I was like, well, the last album you put out, Hefty Sums, was mediocre at best. So maybe if you gave us better music and stopped taking so long in between albums, maybe more people would come to see you. I don't know. I still like the Bloodhound Gang, but it was just kind of sad, the whole experience. And then back at the little North Star Bar became one of my favorite haunts in Philly. I got to see the New Amsterdam. So, you know, I was turned on to Matt Pryor from the Get Up Kids side project. Still follow them, still into them when he puts out stuff. And they were so great live. I just remember somebody, this was after Get Up Kids broke up, and I remember somebody kept yelling for Get Up Kids songs, like, play Hannah Hold On. And Matt, I remember he kind of said like to his guitar as he was tuning it, but he was definitely saying it into the mic on purpose. He was like, read the ticket. He's like, I'm not playing any Get Up Kids songs. This is not that. So that was Sunday, October 30th, 2005. I'm on my last page of tickets here, so thank you for hanging in with me if you've come this far. Again, if you want to see any of the tickets or a couple other pictures that I have from these times, head over to Breathing Underwater 1 on Instagram. On Tuesday, November 8th, 2005, at the North Star Bar, I got to see Gratitude on their final tour. Gratitude was one of the many projects from Jonah Matronga, who was originally the singer of Far, and this was his more like kind of pop rock endeavor. I think it was his first major label project since Far, and it had dissolved spectacularly, just like a lot of these things do. But I think with the members that were still kind of on board for it, they decided to do a final tour with a couple other members that were in one of Jonah's other side project bands called New and Original, which was more like a rock full band experience of his solo one-line drawing music. So he played a mixture of Gratitude and new and original songs, and it was just wonderful and magical. And I was right up front against the stage, and this was the North Star Bar was the kind of place where there was no bar and bouncers in between you and the stage. It was just right against the stage, and I remember like holding on to the edge of the stage as we were like bouncing up and down and having a great time. I'm so glad I got to see some of those songs perform live in that kind of way, because Jonah will play a lot of the stuff solo, but that was the last time that I think a lot of those Gratitude songs were played in the big full plugged in format that they were recorded in. Especially excited to see them. On Friday, November 11th, 2005 at the Electric Factory was Dropkick Murphys. They were touring off of their recently released Warriors Code, and like I alluded to before, I really wasn't into punk in really any way until college. It was my brother that got into punk in college as well, and then got me into it, and Dropkick was one of the first bands that kind of made me appreciate all the different things that are great about punk. And of course, you know, being Scotch-Irish, the Celtic side of it didn't hurt. Actually really helped. And this show was one of the most amazing live experiences that I can remember having out of a ton of great ones, as you can tell from me recounting all these experiences. But I just remember the communal feel, that feeling of like everybody was kind of there together, and it was really positive, and the whole place was just reacting to it. During some of the songs, they're more like kind of like drinky songs like Spicy McHaggis or Good Rats. The whole club would like, we put our arms around each other's shoulders, and everybody was kind of, you know, like swaying back and forth and dancing and singing, and it was so much fun, and it was so positive. It just, you know, brought me back to those, like, even though it was like a much bigger venue than what I grew up with, those like indie local hardcore shows, but it had that same kind of vibe. On Saturday, November 12th, 2005, at the Electric Factory, I saw Fear Factory. And at this point, they were touring off of their Archetype album, which is, according to Dino, I'm pretty sure is a non-canonical or non-canon Fear Factory album because of the whole member snafu and all the changes and infighting. You know, and Dino was out of the band at that point, and Christian had stepped up from bass to guitar. Call me biased, but if you can change members all day, and we've seen this a lot, but as long as that lead singer is still there, it's still technically the same band to me. I don't care who has the trademark rights to it. To me, once you change the singer of a band, it's really hard to... I know some bands have been able to do it and pull it off just fine, but for the most part, like if you took Chino away from Deftones or Burton away from Fear Factory, which we'll see what happens at this point since he's not in the band anymore, but I mean, I miss Dino and his iconicness, but Christian, I thought, did a great job, and I thought that album Archetype is really solid, and as a band live, they were still great. And judging just from this recounting of all these shows, I think I've seen Fear Factory enough to be able to make a judgment call on that one. Tuesday, December 13th, 2005. This one is a big departure from everything else that I've been talking about, because this was Dane Cook at the University of Maryland. You probably know that Dane was huge back then. This was definitely his peak. I think Harmful If Swallowed had come out a year or two before, and I hadn't been to a lot of stand-up at that point. Definitely been to a lot since. And this wasn't the Dane of the early like DVD years that got him a lot of recognition for being such a wild man on stage. He was definitely a performer though. Like more than a joke teller, you have to see him live to really appreciate what he brings. He's very physical, and you know, and he's really good with a crowd. I know he gets a lot of flack for really not being as funny as, or jokey, you know, as punchliney and set up and payoffy as a lot of comedians are, but he did not disappoint at the live show. And I've seen him since, and he was still really good. Tuesday, February 28th, 2006, I got to see NoFX headlining for the first time. That was at the House of Blues in Atlantic City, which is just a stone throws away from Philly, really. I'm surprised I didn't go to more shows there when I was in college. And they were fantastic, just as like irreverent and funny and time-wasty and talky as they're famed to be. But they were really, really fun and entertaining. On Thursday, March 2nd, 2006, at a club that I forgot that even existed, I think I had never been there before and never went there since, called Sonar in Baltimore, Maryland. Jonah Matronga, he was touring off of his And album at the time, and I went with some more recent friends that I had met, partially, I think, because of knowing Jonah, and it was great and personable and as wonderful as always. On Wednesday, March 15th, 2006, I saw Reggie in the Full Effect again at the TLA this time, and they were as great as they were the time before. They did all the theatrics and fake blood, and I just love James. They know how to put on a show. On Saturday, April 22nd, 2006, like I was saying earlier about the Get Up Kids and Weezer being kind of an introduction to more like of an emo side of things, and Alkaline Trio in college, another big one to come out of that was Taking Back Sunday. Still a big fan of theirs, but this is the first time I actually got to see them, and I think this is when they were kind of at their mainstream peak. They were playing at UMBC, which is a University of Baltimore County College or something like that, whatever it's called. I had a lot of friends from high school that ended up going there, and they were good. I remember that it was like a big basketball arena or something, and there were like a lot of people there that, no offense, but you could tell that they had really only known them from like their songs that were on the radio, like Make Damn Sure, because people were just kind of milling about for the most part until Make Damn Sure came on, and then everybody went crazy. So it was like, all right. I think another big reason that I went to this show in particular was because they had a band opening for them. I can't remember the name. It's actually signed on the ticket, which you can see at my Instagram. But it was Billy from Biohazard. It was his band after Biohazard had broken up. One of the many times they broke up. He was playing guitar for some, I don't even know what kind of music it was at this point. I don't think I ever heard much of it. I heard he was in this band. They had even put out an album or maybe a demo or something, but I went to go see him, and then I got to talk to him after the show. He signed my ticket, and I asked him about Biohazard, and he said, no, we're done for good. And then, of course, they got back together. And then on April 21st, 2006, I got to go see, through courtesy of my father, who wasn't actually playing that night, but was able to get us some tickets to see Elvis Costello, somebody I was never really into, but I was familiar with. I think Elvis had written like a movement of a orchestral piece, and he was conducting that, and then the rest of it was him playing with the a limited orchestra. I think it was like a chamber orchestra size, so we got to see him play a lot of his hits with an orchestra backing him up, and that was at the Meyerhoff Symphony Hall in Baltimore, Maryland. And it was cool seeing a legend like that. Like I said, I'm not really familiar with a lot of his music, and I don't seek it out, but when I get the opportunity to do stuff like that, I'm not going to turn it down. All right, and we've made it to the end, my friends. This is the last ticket that I have evidence for of shows that I went to during my college years. It was Between the Buried and Me on May 20th, 2006. Now, the ticket says it was at the First Unitarian Church again, but I'm pretty sure they had moved it to some other like newer venue. I can't remember what it was called. And I remember I had walked there, and it was like a really long walk back. And I remember regretting it because I was wearing flip-flops, or slippas, as I came to call them later when I moved to Maui. But I'm pretty sure this was my last night in Philadelphia. I was like, had all my stuff packed up. I was leaving that night, or maybe the next day. I don't remember exactly, but I had graduated. I saw this show, and then I was out of there. And I just remember Between the Buried and Me just being so amazing to see live, because they are so technical and proficient. Getting to see them pull off a lot of that stuff live was really mind-blowing. But the bill on this show too, there's some big names that came up later too. There was August Burns Red was there, and Number 12 Looks Like You, and Chiodos, I don't know how to say them. I recognize all those names. I haven't followed any of those bands, but I know that they've all made their mark in one way or another after that. But they were all supporting acts of Between the Buried and Me, so that's interesting. So yeah, that's it for what I have. Now, of course, I continue going to shows, and I continue to now. I put out an episode recently of all the shows I went to in 2021. But like I said, the tickets got more sporadic and more digital, and I just didn't keep a record like I did. There was one major show that I went to during this time, during the 2006 time that I was still in college, that I can't believe I didn't keep a ticket to, was Nine Inch Nails. I finally got to see Nine Inch Nails for the first time, and they were touring off of With Teeth. And I mean, I had wanted to see them since high school, and I just never had the opportunity, or whatever, never happened for me. And even kind of like that Rage Against the Machine show, I was disappointed that I was up in the seats, even though that wasn't done to us. It was just what they had available by the time we got tickets, I'm pretty sure. Because knowing me, I would have been on the floor if I could. But even so, I was disappointed, not being able to be close to the stage. But it didn't matter. In that particular case, kind of like Rage, Trent and the band and the atmosphere and all the visuals and everything was just mind-blowing. That was, I think it was at like is there a Verizon arena, or there was a Verizon arena in Philly? It was at some arena in Philly, or outside of Philly. I don't remember exactly. I don't know why I don't have the ticket to it, but that was an incredibly memorable show. As somebody I know put it once, there was my life before and my life after seeing Nine Inch Nails. And I think that's one of those bands that is kind of a life-changing thing. I mean, I couldn't believe how into it I was and how incredible it was, even being so far away from the action. So, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, I was in a band in high school, sort of new metal meets hardcore. We were called Minion, and I have some videos of us up on my website at breathingunderwater.us. But for the song pick this week, I'm going to play the audio from one of the songs we used to cover, which was Soulfly's No Hope, No Fear. Little history here, though, real quick, is that Minion first gestated as an excuse to start playing instruments, rock instruments, because my brother started playing the clarinet and then the trumpet, and I started with the violin. So you can imagine how loud and shrill our house was during practice hour in the evenings when we were in elementary school. But Dave switched over to guitar. I switched over to drums, though I originally was going to be the singer because originally it was just Dave and I and our good friend Jason, and we wanted to start a band, but there were only three of us, and Dave and Jason both wanted to play guitar, and I didn't have anything, so I was going to be the singer, but we quickly realized that that was not going to happen for me. So we had a friend over that had a drum set, and he kind of tried out for us, I guess. I think we only knew how to play like half of one song. For whatever reason, it just didn't quite work out, but he left his set at my house, so I started messing around with it, and we realized that I had rhythm. And I kind of figured out, how to play my first couple beats, and the rest is history. I finally got my own set, and we really got the band going. So pretty soon we incorporated our friend Amy on bass, and we just needed a singer. And I think around this time we were maybe like late sophomores, but early in our junior year, I want to say, a guy that had recently graduated, who was more in the hardcore scene. We were more like, thrash and new metal kids. We used to affectionately call ourselves the Headbangers. That was like, the clique that we identified with. We weren't punk, we weren't jocks, we weren't skaters, we were the Headbangers with our long hair and Metallica shirts and wallet chains and Jinko jeans. But we got reintroduced or connected through like a friend of a friend with a guy that had recently graduated that was looking to join a band. So we finally got that thing going, and that was like the official inception of Minion, as it were, this 5-piece that we had, and we were all kind of novices on our instruments, and we were just learning as we went and learning songwriting as we went. It was so much fun. Definitely one of the most standout years of my youth in terms of life experiences and fun and all the doors that opened and all the people we met and shows we got to play, and it was just so much fun. But before we got Joe in as our singer, we started out learning our instruments, of course, by, playing some covers. And our first cover that we learned all the way through was Pennyroyal Tea by Nirvana. And then once we got Minion going, we learned My Own Summer by Deftones and also Head Up by Deftones. You gotta love songs that are just a few power chords or a few dropped riffs. But of course, in that same vein, we eventually learned No Hope, No Fear off Soulfly's first album. And that song was a blast to play. We just, both for time in our set and for our experience level, we took out the jam bridge of the song and we just wrapped it up with the final chorus. But the recording that you'll hear of this and one of the videos that you'll see if you visit the website breathingunderwater.us was at a long since defunct kind of bar club that was in our hometown of Pasadena, Maryland, which is in the central Maryland, South Baltimore area. And this place was pretty small, and it had a small little stage. But for some reason, I guess because it was closer to Baltimore, it every once in a while would have a national act that would come through it. You heard me mention it earlier when I talked about almost seeing Vanilla Ice there, but I also saw one of my very first shows there sometime soon after that first Deftone show. I saw Jimmy's Chicken Shack, who played with Dog Fashion Disco, which Liquid Metal on Sirius XM radio has weirdly been playing a song by them lately, which I'm really floored by. I had no idea that they had that kind of reach or were even still around. But I also got to see some local legends there. A couple bands that I featured earlier on this podcast, Apathy and Margaret Heater, to name a couple. Because of all those things, it was really a dream come true to get to play there. They would do, I think it was like a Sunday night under 21 kind of show, and they'd have various lineups of like local bands and different genres on different nights and stuff. But we got the privilege of getting to play a couple times, and it was our first experience being mic'd on stage and having monitors. It was crazy. We felt like so big time. So even though the audio and the video, if you go watch it at breathingunderwater.us, isn't good because it was shot on my parents' high 8 video camera back in the day, trust me, it turned out a lot better than it could have just by virtue of us being fully mic'd and amplified on a professional stage and setting. So here is Minion's rendition of Soulfly's No Hope, No Fear.
Alright, Jay, show them what we have.
So if you made it through this whole thing, thank you so much for listening. I would love to hear any standout experiences and highlights from the same era or any shows that were formative for you. And thanks again for listening, and I will see you on the next one. Be sure to visit breathingunderwater.us. Follow me on Instagram at breathingunderwater1 and on Twitter at breathingdakine. That's at breathingdakine. And drop me a line at breathingunderwater1@gmail.com. Please note that I do not claim any ownership of any media presented in this podcast, which is only used for promotional purposes unless otherwise noted. And all views and opinions are those of the person expressing them and do not represent any other entities discussed in this podcast.